Hi, I'm Ashley Adamson, and today we have an amazing special guest on the show, someone I've been following and watching and enjoying for so long, and I think some of you know who this is. This is Dr. Z.
Oh my God, am I blushing right now? Okay, I always get very, I think the feeling is very mutual. I'm a big fan of your work, you know this. I'm a huge fan how you talk about spirituality, especially from that angle. I think it's super, super important. So the feeling is mutual, girl.
Oh my God,
completely
thank you
mutual.
so much. But today we're going to be talking about Dr. Z's book, who she just came out with it in your terms. And it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend that you check it out. There's going to be links down below. We're going to dive into some of the topics that you cover in your book that I thought were especially juicy topics to talk about. So I'm very excited to talk about them.
For those of you watching, I told Ashley earlier that, tough critic, because she pointed out how she basically dissected the book and created another book based on the passages that she found were either interesting or juicy or something to dive into. So I'm in a hot seat today, but I'm excited because I obviously wrote the book, so I know in and out. So I'm really excited to dive in, and I really want to hear what you found interesting and juicy, special. That's really interesting to me.
Yeah, well, I think just the overall thing that I was feeling as I was going through your book, where there's first, I think the transition basics, 101 stuff that you need to kind of know. And because you wrote for people that are either deciding to transition or still questioning, there is a level of education that I think you just had to bring to the table that's this is table stakes.
Right. And you notice that in the first, I think, 3 or 4 chapters.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what my point is, that let's give a little bit of depth in a different speaking tone for those people who are new and just need to sort it out, and then from then on the rest.
And then it was let's go.
That's right. We're in a car, we're driving, we passed 25 miles per hour zone, we're now on a highway, so let's go.
And I loved that about your writing and your style. I was this is perfect for someone who doesn't have a lot of familiarity with the space. You, because of your psychology and therapist background and angle, you very materially take me through the exact things that someone needs to know in order to get to this next step. And I feel for me, at least on my channel and what I talk about, it's more intuitive. And even with my book, I don't think I even laid out complete gender dysphoria and stuff like that. So when I was reading yours, it really felt oh my God, this is a perfect way to be introduced to these concepts.
I'm so glad. I'm glad it came out like that. The idea of the book came to me several years ago, and actually I took some resemblance of idea from a book called Rework, which is a great book on thinking about organizational culture, but they had it broken down in chunks like that, and I thought this is such a great idea, and immediately I outlined this book because I wanted it to jump to those points. I didn't have those first chapters yet, the basic info on dysphoria, but I had immediately stopped telling yourself this. I immediately wanted to have passages on things people continue to tell themselves that are holding them back, and I knew that from then on how the book is going to lay out, and it just went from there.
Kind of fell together.
Yeah, it felt very intuitive, and when I was writing the book, the first chapters were added intuitively. I thought, okay, we need to have some, like you said, set the table, and then there were a few chapters that snuck in. There's a chapter on shame and guilt that snuck in after I did a video, and I was still finishing writing the book, and I thought, okay, this resonated with so many. It's the self-loathing, the shame and guilt, that we have got to have the chapter in the book. And and in fact, that's led me to just seeing how many people are so affected by carrying the self-loathing even post-transition and feeling so much shame. It's actually led me to conceptualizing another book called No More, How to Work Through Shame and Guilt and a Way to Self-Love, specifically focusing on that, and it's going to be more like instructional manual with exercises.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
wow,
so I'm very
excited. You've got quite a selection of books queued up.
I do, and I want to burst them out. Yes.
Oh my gosh, okay. Wow. So we're going to be doing this for a while then.
Okay. Wow, my God, I don't know. I guess we'll
I mean,
see.
so long as I have to keep coming down here for electrolysis every month,
I would love that. I love having you here. So yes. And I'm, by the way, come to Seattle too.
Yes, please come visit.
So it might be a little bit back and forth.
Okay,
sure.
awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so I just need to put a timer on the clock here so I know to kind of keep the recording going. Okay, great. So you have kind of like these chapters where it's like chapter 1 of this section and then chapter 2. So I just see, because I have my edited version, I just see it saying chapter 1, so I'm not sure where we are here. But it says, I can continue to cope with gender dysphoria.
Yeah, this is from Stop Telling Yourself This,
right.
part of the book where this is one of the common things that I hear people say, is that I can continue coping, and you keep pretty much being in denial. That's what it is.
Yeah, and that kind of, this whole section really kind of spoke to me a lot, especially with the comments that I get from my viewers and like what I hear from other trans people, as well as like kind of like what I worked through. I felt like this was a particularly important passage and something that I deeply resonated with, and it feels like a deep resonance across the audiences, partially because maybe people that aren't saying I can deal with gender dysphoria have like very clearly marked like, okay, this is who I am and I'm just now needing to fix this.
Yeah.
Versus those that are in that gray area, which is where I think it kind of comes up more probably.
Yeah, it comes up in an area where people are not sure, but it definitely also comes up with people who know. In fact, people who maybe even went to therapists to confirm that they do have gender dysphoria, but yet they're still clinging to maintaining status quo and a fear of disrupting that status quo. Where by the way,
yes.
where are you, just before you get to it, I was curious that you were saying, did you go through that period yourself where you were telling yourself you can continue to cope with this?
Well, like it's multi-layered, because I think I didn't have the words gender dysphoria. It was more like, I think I can cope with this feeling of wanting to dress as a woman, but I think it's just a fetish, or I think it's just a kink, or maybe it's just something that's weird about me and I don't really get it, and I can just kind of put it over there because it's non-essential to my life. It's just like something that's there and I forget about it and years go by and nothing happens. But I think, and kind of like just getting into some of the, we should probably just get into this. And then maybe we can return to that. So I'm going to read this. Many of you confuse coping with suffering, thinking that what you do is a healthy coping skill. The truth is that gender dysphoria is not susceptible to management. Now, I thought this was very powerful to read, but I feel like I didn't fully like internalize what you meant here. So I wanted you to kind of expand a little bit on the part that says coping with suffering and how those are different or how those are related. I'd love for you to expand on that part. Yeah,
a lot of times we tend to justify maintaining in the position we are by telling ourselves that this is our cross to bear. And I'm not trying to get religious here, but this is the best metaphor I can think about. So this is my suffering. This is something that I am meant to go through. And that is another way of masquerading and telling yourself that you're coping, because at the same time you're also suffering, and yet you think you're taking care of dysphoria, right? But you're not. And so the two tend to intertwine and go hand in hand.
So like you're suffering, but you're saying I can cope with this suffering?
Yes.
Okay.
So you're telling yourself multiple things. You're telling yourself you can continue to cope with the suffering. You continue to yourself suffering is also, you're normalizing suffering for yourself, because to some extent you're coming up with all this justification to avoid taking steps. So you're telling yourself that, by the way, we just talked about the shame and guilt. A lot of it stems from feeling shame and guilt. So I'm suffering because there's all this inbred shame and guilt, and I'm bad. And this part of me is bad. And for me to embrace this part of me would be bad, and everybody would see how bad I am. So they're also part of that suffering. And a lot of times the suffering that people go through, they don't even realize it's really just masqueraded as coping. And what I mean by that in the simplest terms is that I'm naming it for people. I'm saying, let's not hide behind the bush. You're definitely suffering. You are enduring pain, and you're telling yourself you're managing it, but you're not managing it.
And like, how are you able to assess if you're not managing it?
That's a great question. So one of the ways to assess that you're not managing it is to look at the style of coping you have. Oftentimes in this case, the coping would be very destructive to you. It would be overeating, overdrinking, taking drugs, watching too much TV, overworking. In other terms, it's going to be all the things that are inevitably going to affect your health and your well-being.
I see. And so the coping, the binge doing this or that, is the way that you try to get through the suffering? Is that where coping and suffering kind of tie into each other?
Definitely. That could be one way to look at it, for sure. I think there's overall a lot of overlap between suffering and coping, but that's definitely one way to look at it, is that you're saying you're coping with the suffering. I think a lot of people are not aware they're really suffering. I think at this stage, when you're still telling yourself you can cope, there's still some element of denial present, where part of your brain recognizes this is the truth, and part of your brain automatically pushes against the truth. And the recognition and pushing against creates this dichotomy that really kind of does a mind fuck on your brain and makes it very difficult, because it's almost, the picture I'm getting is you're riding two horses, and one is black and one is white, and one is recognition of who you are, another one is pushing against that recognition, and they're pulling you into different direction, and you have to be managed to reel and control those horses. See
right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like I coped with this with just like hard denial, because if you can use denial as a method to just shut out the suffering, then you don't feel like you're feeling the suffering.
Yeah.
You know? Or like, it's like you don't allow a certain level of admission. Like the idea of being a woman when you think you're a cis man, or you think you are existing as a cis man, the idea that you might be a trans woman is such like a massive like object of terror that you go, well, that can't possibly be true. Maybe this is just like this smaller thing that I can allow myself to accept, but maybe this larger thing is just it's just insurmountably not acceptable.
Yeah, it's huge. What you're talking about is huge, because this is where people find themselves at this tremendous big crossroads of realizing, and at the same time, like you said, there's this monumental huge leap. Holy shit, that means this. And you take it even further. If this means this, then that means, and suddenly all this idea about that your brain has got inundated with transition comes to mind. That means I'll have to go through surgeries and hormones, and my loved ones are going to leave me, and nobody's going to want me, and oh my God, I'm not going to pass, and oh my God, this is going to happen. And then it becomes this huge looming catastrophe, because from where you're at the point of recognition to that point that you're looking at, it's a huge mountain. And you're very under-equipped, right? So you're looking at this mountain and you're realizing you're going to have to climb it. But you haven't even started going to gym and flexing your muscles to be in a good you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You haven't even considered starting to gather the right climbing equipment that you're going to need. So it's terrifying, because you feel incredibly under-equipped to even contemplate that.
Yeah, I do remember the moment where my partner at the time asked me about the pronouns people were using on me, and they were using she, her. She said, how did that feel? And it was kind of like the last straw for me to kind of like ask within my own internal knowing, which you mentioned in the book, like asking your internal knowing.
Yeah.
And that, it felt literally like a bookshelf like falling over, because like everything I'd been keeping at bay just like could no longer.
Yourself.
Yeah.
That's a great metaphor.
Yeah, so that kind of like stood out to me. Also, what stood out to me is where you were saying binge feminizing, and that's like such a concept, but like I never really thought of it like that. Like people that like to cross dress, or like needing to find some space to like feminize, and then you kind of put it away with shame. And then you're like, okay, like I'm never going to do that again. And then it gets locked away. And then at some point it kind of comes back again. And it made me think about addictive behaviors too, because addictive behaviors are things that people can binge and then they feel shame with, and that kind of makes them more addictive.
Totally. That's where I got the binge idea. I was thinking about actually eating behaviors of people who struggle with binge eating disorders, where you eat, and you stuff yourself because you're so hungry for it, right? You're so hungry for all these nutrients, and then you feel so much guilt and shame that you throw the cake in a garbage and you walk away from it, and then you starve yourself. It's the same phenomenon I see clearly with trans individuals, where it's either binge feminizing, masculinizing, or you can substitute the word for any other gender presentation you want. It's this insatiable appetite to be yourself, and people go on a shopping spree, so you're buying all the stuff, and then they do it, and they feel so much shame and guilt, and God, the amount of money that people must
I know,
burn
right?
through to go through this experience.
Like, do you, I guess I wonder about this in addiction and like how it relates to like dopamine, and like why binging and purging is like a part of this cycle. Is it, like, I think it's also about like this, because it becomes forbidden, you actually get a much higher dopamine release from doing it. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I love where you're going with this. I love how you're thinking broader. Yes, I think not so much even forbidden for sure, but the abstinence from that which we so badly wanted. In this case, for people, it's literally abstinence from who they truly are. That abstinence prolonged creates a pressure cooker. It creates this tremendous amount of pressure. So then when you release it, it feels so good. Oh my God, this is...
It's got to feel amazing.
Exactly. And for a lot of people it does, until they experience a shred of, oftentimes it's internalized transphobia, of looking at themselves in the mirror and not feeling like
saying all the negative things.
Exactly.
Look at you, like, I can't believe you did this, and
exactly,
like all the ugly words that you want to use against yourself.
But dopamine definitely has a lot to do with it. I mean, it's very similar to aggressive behaviors, and it's just psychically to go back and forth. It's just not good for you, because you constantly, first of all, you're creating a habituated way of living with this. And again, you're telling yourself you're coping when you're really not, and creates incredible destruction in your life. And there's a lot of imbalance that comes from it, because those cycles will create a variety of emotions that are going to interfere with other areas of your life, right? So if you just binged and you feel amazing and suddenly feel shame and guilt, that shame and guilt is going to last you weeks and even potentially months. And that's going to affect your relationships. You're going to be withdrawn around your loved ones. You're not going to want to engage in work. Little minor depression is going to follow. So it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, and it kind of touches on this thing you said earlier, which is like the guilt and the shame and how you see yourself, and how this kind of becomes a secret that has a life of its own. And then that kind of reinforces this idea around the shame and guilt that you're hiding. And so you have this idea of yourself, and that there's this ongoing secret that you're living, that you're not telling others, and you kind of start to hate yourself because of this secret that you're shameful about.
Yeah, and this is, by the way, a lot of people don't talk about this. I find there's also parallel why for trans feminine individuals there is a sexual arousal when they feminize, because you're keeping all this energy in, and with a rush of dopamine, it's inevitable that your body is also, for a lot of people, it's just going to have a natural physiological response that is going to have nothing to do with activity itself. So it can be, that's also another thing that I see. And it gets confused with, oh my God, am I struggling with astrogynephilia, and all of the things start to come up in one's mind. And for some people, it is arousal of themselves, and there's nothing wrong with it. And for a lot of people, it's just natural body response.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it was arousing for me when I first started, partially because it's forbidden, but I didn't really understand it. Like, I was only 13 when I did some cross-dressing, and I put that in quotes. And then I was like, wait, this feels wrong. Like, I'm aroused. This feels right, but this feels wrong. This doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. And like, that was kind of like, don't touch it for like 10 years or whatever. And then kind of like trying to re-engage it and trying to understand it. It's like the more exposure you get to it, eventually it's no longer this arousing or thrilling experience in that kind of way anymore. And I think stepping out into the real world and presenting was the crossover where you change the context and then you go, oh, like this is actually how I like to be, and it has nothing to do with sex. That was the only safe place to do it, which was in my bedroom at first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's a really important point. And this is why a lot of people attest that once they started hormones, so they started taking the steps towards who they are, that sexual component just evaporates, and which is a testament.
I hope it doesn't evaporate.
You hope it doesn't?
The sexual component of just being, but no, I get it.
Yeah.
It's just like, I hope I have a sexual component to my experience, but
yeah,
that's different. Plenty of videos about that.
Yes.
Okay, so that was just like one page.
Okay,
so,
how many pages you got there?
I've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I've got a bunch, so we'll see what happens. Okay. That's just a really juicy topic, so yeah. All right, so chapter 3, I can outrun gender dysphoria. To avoid confronting that which denial is a losing game. It doesn't last. You can't win at denial. Sure, it may feel safe to remain in denial, to avoid confronting that which you fear, but eventually that which you refuse to acknowledge comes up to the surface, and when it does, it's never pretty. Remember, what you resist persists.
Yes.
And I was like, yes.
That's, by the way, not my quote. I think this is just a famous classic quote, what you resist persists. But it's so fitting, right? Because the lid always comes off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this, I mean, this idea of like how bubbles rise in water and how like that's kind of like truth. It's like you kind of, if you don't want the bubbles to come out, you have to apply pressure or use some mechanism to stop these things from pushing. But if you keep having bubbles coming up, it's eventually going to apply enough pressure where you need to force more.
Exactly.
And like, I think this is like, I was reading I was in a therapy thing for ACT, I think it's called ACT therapy, and they were talking about how people have avoidant behaviors or ways that they can cope with things is to like push away something.
Yep.
But it's like if you're holding something back, that doesn't change the fact that you're holding it back. And you still need to exert a certain amount of energy to keep that held back, right?
Yeah.
So you're kind of saying in this passage, you're saying, yeah, sure, you can hold that back, but like you're always going to be holding that back. And like that always requires energy. And at some point that force becomes stronger.
Exactly.
And what do you do about that?
Exactly. And I have yet to see where a person was able to stay in denial indefinitely. Not almost, always it comes up. What people do at the point when they're out of denial, there's so many pathways. But you can't stay in denial indefinitely. That's just humanly not possible. And again, that pushing that away, it's almost playing a kid's game, right? It reminds me of children when they haven't learned object permanence yet. So where you will hide the toy away from them, and then they will look for they still haven't realized all the thing.
Yeah.
We're adults, right? So we have learned
permanence. I love that.
Yeah, we're adults, so we have learned. We know that it's still going to be there, but yet we're playing this child's game outside of our mind. So it's really important to recognize that what you're doing is you're holding the lid. The bubbles represent the incongruency that you feel, the suffering and struggles. Covering the lid, at least be out of denial in acknowledging phase where you're saying, I have this, I'm not ready to deal with it or look at it, versus, nope, this ain't happening, because the reality is us.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying here with it's almost like a misattribution of like object permanence. Like object permanence in physical reality is very easy to understand. But when you're thinking about what's in your mental framework and what exists, you may start with this idea that this idea is temporary and that it can just go away and never come back. But what you're saying is these things that keep returning are permanent. They are going to keep coming back, and you can't really get rid of them. Yeah,
especially when it comes to our such deeper senses of who we are. Those things are there for a reason. You cannot escape the truth of who you are. You can not deal with it. You can try to stuff it away, but you can only run for so long. Eventually, it's going to always catch up with you.
Yeah. That makes sense. I never really thought of it as like running away from it, but it felt like something that I really didn't understand, like a deeper underlying vibe that became more articulated as I spent more time working with it. Because it's like, oh, like I like to wear women's clothes. What does that mean? And then, now I'm wearing women's clothes. And now, like, what do I like here? Oh, I like wearing makeup. Oh, I like people addressing me in the perception that I am a woman. Oh, okay, like they're using the pronouns on me. That feels good. And then it kind of, the idea or the notion or the feeling starts to rise up, and it starts to have more details on it. I kind of think of this as like imagination, and how when you first imagine something, it's a very vague concept. And then as you keep revisiting this thing and you start to map it to other things in your experience, it starts to become more and more fleshed out and more detailed. And it, like, I think when you're adult, and this is kind of a much larger thing, like the bookshelf concept of it being like this, it means a lot. It's like a lens is out of focus. You really want to start focusing the lens and understanding more materially what you're looking at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Another metaphor to look at this particular chapter segment is, we've seen it in films where somebody's learning to box and they're still very young and novice, and there's this big trained boxer who boxed for so long, and they're holding their head like this and they're trying to get to them with the punches, but they can't get to them, right?
Yeah.
Well, the bigger boxer represents the dysphoria. It represents that aspect, and it's you who's exerting so much energy thinking you're fighting it, but you're nowhere near actually getting to it. Right? So that's another metaphor to look at it, because the reality is that you have to look at how large it is. Then you have to acknowledge it, and then you have to take the right steps in order to overcome it, alleviate it, in order to do anything about it that you wish to do about it. But otherwise, you're just exerting so much energy. And in the chapter, I say, just you keep putting on your running shoes and tying your laces every single day to feel like you can outrun it, but you can't. It has faster shoes. It has done this race million of times. You're running against the pros. So.
Yeah. And what you resist persists. It's like the more you engage with that, just even that like neural pathway, you're building a deeper and deeper pathway with this, which means that it's getting a stronger line of communication with you.
Yes.
And it becomes a story that you start to craft with yourself. I engage with this thing. This thing exists in my reality, and I keep engaging with it, and it keeps becoming a conflict. And so it kind of occupies, it kind of permanently occupies a part of your life at that point, where you now have a relationship with it because you are working against it.
Yes, and that then becomes deeply unhealthy, because when you start having relationship with it, just like you said you depersonalize it. You're now seeing that as a fragment of you versus a part of you. And so the resistance starts to grow bigger and bigger. And that's, I think, is really unhealthy, because it's you. It's like shadow work, right? And people avoid shadow, but it's like it's part of you. It's right there.
Yeah. I'm just thinking to my experiences of it, where it's like you just start to, it feels like it's not you, but then the more you spend distancing yourself with it, the more work you have to put into bringing it back into the fold.
Exactly. Oh my God, I'm so glad you said that. Exactly. So I think for people watching, if they're in that position, it's important to realize that length of time is not necessarily going to make things easier. It's going to make things that much more harder to now integrate that part of yourself, because essentially what we're talking about is a part of ourselves that we have disevolved, that we have really disowned and said doesn't exist, it's out there, and won't do anything. And the more we do that, the harder the integration is going to be.
Yeah, it's like, this is not safe to engage with. You might say, I hate this thing. I don't want to talk to this thing. This thing is my enemy. And the more you condition yourself to think these things, the harder it is to reach.
Exactly.
So moving on to the next thing. So this is, I think, this may be a part of the same chapter, but I just highlighted it because I was like, Dr. Z, this is like the best fucking thing right here.
What is it?
Stop wasting your precious time. Time is an asset you can't get more of, nor can you get your time back.
Yeah.
Fuck.
I think we don't. There's two biggest assets in life, I learned. One, it's time, because you can never buy money, you can buy money, you can never buy time. And the second one, your biggest asset is you. If you are not taking care of yourself, and if you're sick, you can't work, and therefore you can't have roof and everything over your head. So those are the two biggest assets, you and your time.
Yeah, and like I see so many people through the YouTube comments and just like in my own community, like people hemming and hawing about like, is this the right thing? I'm not really sure. I'm confused. And like, that's fine to be in a confused state. So let me just like plant that statement there. It's fine to be confused. It's a confusing thing to do. Yeah. But like, at what point are you just walking around in circles? Exactly. And you need to break that circle at some point.
Yeah, and in the end of a chapter, I throw a sentence or two of suggestion, and I always say it doesn't have to be a ginormous leap. It doesn't have to be a giant step. You don't have to jump into any interventions. It can be as simple as start talking to somebody, start seeing somebody, just start sitting with it yourself, start journaling and writing down, this is what's happening, but I'm not ready to acknowledge yet, but I can at least now acknowledge that this is happening. You know, it can be tiny step. It doesn't have to be huge.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like the smallest step for me was, hey, like I like dressing up femininely. Let me actually step into that a little bit more. And then that kind of helped me take more steps. I think like a lot of trans people, when they're talking to me, they're like, well, like, I just don't know if I should do hormones or not. And it's all tied up in taking hormones. Yeah. And it's like, oh, like if I realize I'm a trans woman, then I need to take hormones. And it's like, you don't have to go that far. Like, you don't need to predict your path that, like, this much smaller thing, like you can just, like you said, like write something out or do something super small there. There was another thing that you said in there that I wanted to get into, but maybe that'll come back. Okay. Was there something you wanted to say?
No.
Okay. We'll just move to the next section. We have plenty of sections to go through. Okay. So this is still in this stop telling yourself this section. If you take a shovel and dig deep into your subconscious, you'll find a single constant denominator beneath all your fears. You are afraid you won't be able to handle it. It's a fear of being unable to handle whatever comes your way. Fear of being abandoned. You're afraid you won't be able to handle it. Fear of losing your job. You are afraid you won't be able to handle it. Fear of not passing. You are afraid you will not be able to handle it. Can you expand a bit more on this?
Yeah, I think we tend to not really think about what's underneath our fears. We all experience fears, right? Fear is a common emotion that a lot of us feel. It's familiar to all of us. And we can all feel fear in regards to numerous things. Asking somebody out on a date, becoming a parent, right? Taking first steps to acknowledging who you are. It's all the same things that we feel. Underneath all of those fears, there's another deeper layer that just beyond that surfacey things that you fear. So the fear of, let's say, fear of asking somebody out, that's a very surface fear. Yeah, you're afraid of that for sure.
Yeah.
But deep down, what truly scares you is that you won't be able to handle what's going to happen when that happens.
Yeah.
So for example, if that person going to say no, you're afraid you can't handle rejection. If that person going to say yes, now you're afraid, what if it's not going to work out? So it's really fear of not being able to handle, in a bigger scheme, life in general.
Yeah, and like, I mean, what can you handle if you can't handle that?
Well, I think the truth is all of us can handle anything in a human sphere. We truly can, and through humanity, it's been clearly documented by people handling a lot of things. But I think, losing the touch with belief that we can, and it's losing the touch with our inner resourcefulness that we can. But the reality is that it's harder to break us than we realize. We're stronger than we actually think we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot more resilience in you and who you are. And you're far more capable than you really know. It's almost like the fear of the test rather than the test itself.
Exactly.
You have this exam coming up and you're like, oh my God, it's so big. But then when you actually do it and you prepare for it, as you should, students out there, you should prepare for your exams. But it's like, when you actually get to the execution of what you need to do, you'll find that you'll surprise yourself, right? You'll find that you're much more capable.
Well, you realize you can handle it.
Yeah.
Right? This is the thing about the fear. We're afraid, then we do it, and the minute we do it, we get a handle on it, and the minute we have the handle on it, we realize we no longer fear it. So the antidote to fear is actually action.
Yeah.
And it's by action that we start having those building blocks of learning that we can handle a lot more than we realize. And the more we do actionable things in life, the more we're able to take on additional things. This is why people who are entrepreneurs, where especially one of their business failed and they go right ahead in the next business, and you always wonder, how can you take the risk all the time? They have mastered that fear of handling. They're still afraid. Fear is always going to be there, but they know from their past histories that they can handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really comes down to a story of what you tell yourself. If you have this thought loop going on, like, I'm not going to be able to handle it, it's going to be a catastrophe, you're going to see reasons and ways in which it does become a catastrophe and it does become a problem.
Yeah.
And like, I got this with imposter syndrome when I was like transitioning into teaching myself how to do design. Mm-hmm. And I got this definitely with transitioning as a woman, like, oh my God, I'm going to be seen as a man in a dress and people are going to like throw stones at me. And,
Oof.
you know, like all of the fears of violence happening. And,
yeah.
you know, it really does depend on the context of like where you are. Like if you're in far east, like Europe, like maybe people will throw stones, unfortunately.
For sure.
It's like in America and even now, I guess it's in certain states, it's safer than in others. But there are small things that you can do where you can take these steps and you can start to work on these little fears. It's like exposure therapy, right? Like telling just someone that I think I'm transgender. This was a point that I wanted to get to earlier, which is how you can accept smaller bits. Being able to tell myself, you know what, I'm not cis, was the starting point for me to acknowledge that my identity didn't fit within the norms. Mm-hmm. And then I went one layer down, which is, okay, I'm not cis. Does that mean I'm binary or does it not mean? I don't really know. I won't make that decision. I'll be gender fluid and I'll be like non-binary and see where that kind of settles me first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's lots of room for that. And it's like you said, it's so important to just first foremost acknowledge that the gender that you are assigned at birth is just doesn't feel right? That's like such a big first step to acknowledge that. And for people watching, I really encourage people to look at their life. Not chances, but you're probably going to find out there's a shitload of things you have been already handling, and they're big things. Some of you are already parents. Some of you have been through some difficult employment things. Some of you had failed at exams that you needed to pass, right? So we forget there has been so many traces of things that were scary, and we dealt with them, and now they're in the back of us, and we don't even think about them. This is just like one of those things too. Is it big? Yes. Does it feel overwhelming? Yes. But is it still something you can handle? Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes, you can. You can totally handle it.
Yes. Yeah. And like, it's kind of like you want to intentionally almost bias yourself to look for evidence in the past where you have succeeded and you can demonstrate to yourself that you have been able to overcome. Because if you can train your mind to bias you in such a way where it says, you know what, I actually am more capable, then you can start to really anchor your perception on your capabilities and start to believe a story where you can say, I am capable of doing change and making things happen. And this may sound like a little bit like self-deception, but you could also argue that your insecurities and the fact that you're selectively looking at why you can't succeed is also a self-deception.
Yes, I would agree with that, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. How are we doing on time? Should we reset it? No, we're good. All right, so I just read it and it just says, fuck society and fuck community standards. And I'm like, hell yes, Dr. Z, let's do this.
Oh, that's funny.
But then you say, to you, I pose this question, and that's to the reader. Would you rather be attractive but miserable in your gender assigned at birth? Or would you rather be unattractive but healthy and happy in your authentic gender. And I think this is from the "if I transition, I will look ugly, stop telling yourself this"
Yes,
section.
it is.
Yeah, please tell me more.
Yeah. So passing, as we know, is not everybody's goal, right? Which is important to acknowledge. We also live in society that puts all this incredible big double standards on what passing is and how women and men are to look, and how trans women and trans men ought to look, and how non-binary people ought to look. I mean, it's an ongoing conversation. But essentially what the chapter was about is a lot of people do hold this fear that's holding them back, that if I were to transition, I will be ugly. And that's exact word that people will use. I'm afraid I'm just going to be ugly. I mean, there's a lot of other words I'm not going to say.
Definitely felt that.
Right? So it's like such the minute you, and I see this equally in individuals who are transmasculine, transfeminine, but mostly in transfeminine individuals, because there's so much societal pressure. The standard, it's like,
God, of just being a woman, period, the standards are high. And then being a trans woman, it's like...
Exactly. And it shouldn't be. And, the truth is, I have seen so many diverse individuals, so many diverse body types and shapes and different age groups. I've seen people who literally have a background of being football players, literally have that physique, and they transition this graceful, beautiful, feminine individuals. I mean, and I'm not saying this to blow somebody's horn. And yes, there's some people who still struggle after transition, and a lot of goes into that. Resources primarily play a huge key. Let's not fool ourselves.
Yeah.
But for those people who keep telling themselves, I'm not going to do this because I'm afraid I will be ugly, it's important to then think about how much emphasis are we putting on this external looks versus what about your health? What about how this will inevitably destroy you, inevitably shorten your lifespan on this planet? This is the only lifetime you have. I mean, even if you believe in reincarnation, but now this is for your consciousness, this is it, right? So it's really important to switch that and ask yourself, okay, what's the alternative? On one side, I will be whatever you see yourself attractive right now, but gender assigned at birth, but miserable or happy. And the worst case scenario, it does happen for you that you end up being unattractive, which is rare. I will have never seen it, because I think the people need to realize the person who is making that statement call, the person who is saying I'm going to be ugly, is a person that is only seeing this huge leap. It's not the person that has started taking steps and go, oh my God, this is making me feel so much better. Holy shit, I'm starting to feel confident. Holy shit, I have all this mental space to focus on other things. When you catch up with those steps, you no longer see that as I will be ugly. You see that as I will do my best when I get there, right? So that's important to realize that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I want to dig into that more, because it's you're in a place where you're not able to see what you're capable of, and you're making a projection and estimate of where you're going to be when you haven't even taken those steps to get there.
Exactly.
I remember not knowing how to get a haircut, a proper haircut for my face. When I had so I had facial feminization, for those that don't know, but when I had a larger forehead, getting bangs was just such a huge step forward for me to feel more comfortable in my own skin, and it made me look prettier without actually changing my face much. But even just knowing these small little things gave me these little steps that made me feel more attractive to myself. And you just don't see those possibilities when you're starting out.
You don't. And you don't see the whole picture. You're standing at the pieces of puzzle, and you're thinking, there's no way this is ever going to come together and be a cohesive picture, right?
Yeah, it's all a mess.
It's all a mess. And you're looking at it and you're and then, it's also important, since we're talking about it, to also realize that there's other upside of the pendulum swinging, where people actually have way grandiose ideas of what's going to happen. I'm going to start hormones, and the hormones are going to do the whole 9 yards, and I'm going to look like Kardashians. And I think it's great to have aspirations. I think it's important to root those aspirations within the reality context of everything else.
Yeah, because that's a catastrophe looming if you put all of your chips on that.
It's so heartbreaking. I've seen that happen, and it's just really, ouch.
Yeah, I knew a trans woman who was I'm just going to present male, and I'm going to have I'll do hormones for like 3.5, 4 years. I'll do facial feminization. I'll do top surgery. I'll do all of these things, and then I will come out.
Yeah.
And that feels like, why would you want to extend your time oppressing yourself?
Yes.
And like just trying to avoid this idea of, well, there's going to be paper cuts every day. Like being trans, there are paper cuts every day. Being human, there are paper cuts every freaking day. Like you can't escape the paper cuts.
I love that analogy. Now I'm thinking I want a paper cut chapter in my book.
Yeah,
oh
paper
my
cuts.
God, I love
Fucking
that
paper
analogy.
cuts. It's everywhere. God damn it.
Oh, it's so good. But paper cuts heal quicker and they go away quicker than in the end getting a deep cuts that then leave scars.
Yeah.
And that's the chapter on build houses, not castles. That's what exactly that chapter.
I've got that in here too. I've got that in
that's
here.
what the chapter is about. It's about you better do little things, and even if there's setbacks or things get hurt, you learn how to deal with it, and then you become stronger. Like paper cuts, okay, owie. Next time you get a paper cut, you're like, okay, I had it before, still sucks. Owie again, but you know that not only it heals, but you won't have a scar.
Yeah, and like every now and then you just don't have the energy to cope or handle all of these paper cups, and it does feel like it is a little bit of a collapse, like as if you've built a sandcastle and the water hit it really hard, you know, and you're like, oh fuck, my castle. But instead you're like, oh shit, my day or my life, or I've had those days where it's just like it feels like you're falling into a pit of despair. You know, and it's just deep. But this is where the resilience comes out, and it's why I think we do need to adopt a warrior mentality, like the ability to kind of persevere and to not necessarily fight it, but to be a fighter and have that fighter spirit.
I fucking love this. This is why I love your book, Kung Fu. Trans Kung Fu. Which I have on my shelf with all the annotations and post-its. This is why I love it. I think it's not only warrior mentality, but when things we've done, they fall, realizing that you're the one who made it happen to begin with, right? So you obviously can do this for yourself again. It's gonna take time, yes, but you can obviously do this, right? So it's just like business startup. You started a business, it didn't work out, but guess what? You obviously have capacity to build a business.
Yeah, you're still alive, you're not homeless.
So build it again, right? So it's the same thing. People need to realize that they're incredible, they have incredible reservoir of resilience. I would say trans folks have way more reservoir of that resilience than cis folks, because a lot of you had to carry that incongruency for so long. That takes a lot of strength to do. Whether you're coping healthy or not, that still takes a lot of benefits of strength. And I mean, cis people are like, Yeah, and like think about back to the thing of like holding energy. It's like you're holding all that energy to hold this thing back. Think about your potential, about what you would have if you had that energy back. Oh my God.
You know, and that you also have this resilience now because you've already been in the hyperbolic chamber of yourself. And it's like, all right, well, like now that I can create gender congruency, I can now just go out there in the world and take these skills that I've developed and just conquer whatever I want to set my mind to. And that's like the most amazing part, right? Get this shit out of the way and then see what you're going to do.
Yeah. And this reminds me, one of the YouTubers on my channel commented, and I will never forget, it was such a brilliant comment. They said, if I only dealt with it versus avoiding it for so long, I would have multiple PhDs, be versed in multiple languages, have, you know, they like outlined all of the things, which it was such a great example of you're really holding back yourself and your potential by not dealing with this. Deal with it and then just blossom all of your potential out.
Yeah, we need more trans powerful leaders out there.
Yes.
And like they just need to get over their transition.
Please. Yes.
So hurry up.
Yes, hurry up.
Yeah,
totally.
No, I feel that. Like, I mean, just having to fly down here every single month because I have bottom surgery in a year now, and it's like I have to every 3 weeks I have to stop the work that I'm doing, all of the focus, and commit resources to flying down here and spending about a week. Like I have a business coach, and we sync every week, and he's like, okay, what are we gonna focus on this week? And I was like, surviving, because all the travel and time and commitments. So like out the door go all of these other goals that I had because I need to focus it here. And you think about that across all of the different trans people that are going through their transition, and I'm like in a really good place in my world. And like, I'm still unable to fully fulfill the dreams and desires that I have purely because I have to focus my time on my transition.
Yeah.
Like, if I can get that out of the way, I would have so much unblocked. I can't imagine what you'd be capable of if you had that unblocked for you. Like, think about that. And then think about...
Man. Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I want to scream hallelujah. But it's true. I mean, transition is in of itself, like having a toddler you're taking care of, and you can't wait for them to grow up to take care of themselves. It's a lot of work, right? It's depending also how you lay out and stretch out. But essentially in the beginning, there is a lot of work. There's schedule appointments, all of the things going on. Again, depending how you want to lay it out. But once you're done, all the space gets liberated. And imagine all the headspace, mental headspace that gets cleared up to now really focus on what you want to do.
Yeah, and does it matter anymore if you're ugly or not at that point? Because you're like, I'm ready to take on the world. And that's going to be a naturally more attractive and more beautiful person.
Exactly. Oh, yes.
Amen, sister.
Hallelujah.
Oh my God.
I feel like we need like a chorus behind us.
Fuck, let's have a church.
Yes, I feel like we
church
need to
choir,
have
like hit the chord.
Soulful church choir, yes.
Oh my God. Yeah,
That's
like we can get like a MIDI keyboard next time, and we could just like
Yes.
hit a chord
Oh,
and we're like, all right,
totally.
we hit a note.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
the trans god. Oh my God. Okay. So chapter 9. My partner won't let me transition. That's the chapter we're in. So I highlighted this part, which is self-sabotage is an unconscious defense you engage in to avoid feeling abandoned. You're referring to this fear of abandonment in this chapter. Many of you, if not most, who are struggling with gender dysphoria have a deep unconscious fear of being unlovable. And I was like, fuck, you just spoke to me so hard. It's like I have a video that's like, will I ever be lovable or something?
That breaks my heart. That breaks my heart.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a reality, right?
It is a reality, but I wish it's reality we didn't have to talk about.
I know. But my first boyfriend got me through that. Because I was like, will I ever be lovable? I go on all of these dates with other people to try and break that invalidation. And then I think it was like the 200th or the 150th person ended up being my boyfriend, and he showed me what love was, and then that made me. And I have a video to him as well about that. But I don't know if relying on an external source to validate if you are lovable or not is like a fully sustained thing.
It is. I think that this concept that people keep perpetuating, you have to learn how to love yourself before you learn to love somebody else, is complete bullshit.
Yes. All right, tell me more.
I think for some people that can be the case, but I think for a lot of us, we're human creatures, and sometimes we need to see that externalized in regards to our inner selves for us to believe that we can also give it to ourselves and that we are lovable. So yeah, I just think that's like a myth.
Okay, thank you for saying that. And I feel like this is totally a strategy that I used, and is maybe like a good strategy sometimes. Is like, you have this inner doubter that says, no, you can't be this, or no, you can't be lovable, or this is why you're flawed. And sometimes you need an outsider's perspective that you can leverage to say, you know what, I'm wrong, because this person is showing me that I'm wrong in thinking about myself in a negative way. Exactly.
You need somebody else's angle of perception, because the way we see ourselves is not the right way. And to break through that and to learn that our perception is wrong and fucked up is not easy to do. That's why we need the external, right? So it's almost like with my husband, because he had such a not good, healthy marriage in the past, there were things about that he habituated to doing that he felt bad about.
Right.
And when he got together with me, for me, I was like, this is just you. These are like how you are as a person, and it just makes you more unique. And it took him a while to realize that this part of himself is not bad, because I did not see it bad. So I think we need those people in our lives. So yeah, that's.
You must have blown his mind.
Well, we blow each other's mind. Let's put it that way.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, we blow each other's mind for sure. Yeah.
A lot of mind blowing, huh?
Yes,
couldn't resist.
In all kind of contexts. Yes, in all kind of contexts. In intellectual.
Getting juicy here.
And intellectual and yeah, you name it. Yep.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay. So expanding upon this, deep unconscious fear of being unlovable, comma. This is where we went off topic. That people will leave you and you will end up alone. Also, deeply feel that fear. Feelings of abandonment are a byproduct of years of living with gender dysphoria, and as a result, internalizing feelings of guilt and shame. Oh wait, I think this is a separate topic, so let's just stop there with the fear of being unlovable and that you will end up all alone, and how this relates to my partner won't let me transition.
Yeah, so that fear is oftentimes what keeps people stuck in that cycle, right? So what happens, and I see this pattern all of the time, this is like 90% pattern play out, where a person experiences gender incongruency at a young age, either in childhood or in teens. They want to externalize who they are, usually it's to their parents or caregivers, and then it takes one look, or just one, parents don't even have to say anything, it's just like this one look of what the fuck are you doing, for a child to stuff it inside. And then what happens is that now the child is unconsciously internalizing that, oh, this part of me is bad, they didn't like this part of me, so I have a part of me that they don't like, so now I'm going to try to wow their love and attention, I'm going to self-please them.
Yeah.
So they go through the cycle of trying to self-please them, which translates into self-pleasing their partners, and it all cycles back to the fear of that if I acknowledge who I am, then I'm showing that part that I showed to my parents that was already rejected to my partner, and that it's going to be the same thing. They're going to reject me and I'm going to be all alone.
Right.
And inevitably it sips into this idea that nobody will ever love me. Because if you think about it, parents are our primary anchors in terms of love for a lot of us. So it's really important to get that caregiving from parental figures, because they anchor to us that those things are possible. When you have a parental figure that doesn't anchor that back to you, that says that no, there's a part of you that is horrible and just disgusting, or whatever it is the parents say, then we carry that blueprint into other relationships, and we then internalize and we believe that, well, shit, if my mom couldn't love that part of me, how would this person love that part of me? You see what I mean? Mom's supposed to unconditionally love me. This person doesn't really have to unconditionally love me. How are they supposed to even like this part of me? You see what I mean?
Yeah, because it's like they're your first exposure to intimacy and emotional connection.
Yeah.
And it's what you form your blueprint on, and then you build your house from there. And it's really hard to access that because it's so deep within your system. You don't even know where the doorways are within your own mind unless you have someone to talk through with it. I guess like that's one way of doing it, because you can ask questions and you can get them to that place. But I mean, you just see this everywhere. Like so I just broke up with my boyfriend, and like, where I wouldn't even call him a boyfriend, but we were almost there, and he applied some kind of family blueprint that he worked through, where he's got the distancing thing.
Like you pull back. So
pull back
getting
super
close
hard.
to commitment.
Yeah. And like, it just stopped communicating. Like, it's like, how can I couldn't even break up with him because he just stopped communicating.
Oh my God. That's to me also fear of abandonment. It's the same blueprint.
Yes.
But now you're afraid that if you get too close and you fully give yourself to this person may one day leave you. It basically comes from a mindset of needing those people so badly in our lives versus learning how we can need ourselves.
Yeah, and I mean...
Oh, I'm sorry.
You know, it's fine. Oh, sorry, my timer just went off. I think we're still fine. Yeah, but like, I think, so I'm trying to think about my fear of being unlovable and like, can I be lovable? And when I was working through that, like, I didn't necessarily have a poor relationship with my family or my parents. I think like it felt like maybe there's a certain bar that I felt is a lovable partner, and I wasn't sure if I could hit that bar. And maybe that is the blueprint that I was even using in my own way of perceiving relationships, is there's a bar and you have to hit that bar, because I'm a high performing individual, and you would imagine that a person raised in that kind of environment where there is a bar, that becomes the way of kind of like catching yourself as unlovable or lovable. And back to the you're gonna grow up ugly or whatever, you know, like it's like, well, if I'm not like attractive enough, or if I don't have this, or if I don't have that, then I won't reach this bar.
I know.
I spent a lot of money.
in therapy. It's just, I'm such a, people are gonna gosh, but I'm such, I don't really like long-term talk therapy because I feel like a lot of times we just mentally masturbate on our problems and then we find out why things are the way they are, but then we're still stuck in the cycle. Well, now that I know, action is the best thing. If you have a problem loving yourself, you have problem, if you fear that you are unlovable, buy yourself flowers. Like do start doing things that you want for yourself and nobody else. And they can be small things, If you really want to take yourself out, take yourself out. You want to buy yourself that outfit, buy that outfit. Start small. And anytime you find yourself overextending yourself for others while you're holding yourself back, that's such a great sign that you need to now set boundary and pull back from giving and pull in to give yourself. It's just even something as simple as treating yourself to something periodically, even if it's small, like I said, is monumental, because you then start to build this internal habit of, okay, all right, I can give myself. You don't even realize, but your unconscious will start doing that.
Yeah, that's super important.
Yeah.
Like the way that you can communicate with your subconscious and access it and program it and reshape it is to use signals that it can understand and interpret in ways that tell it otherwise for how it has been conditioned.
Yes. It's also a great way to learn how to love yourself and how to realize that the people next to you, they are not obligated to give you that love, that they can love you in different ways. So example with flowers. I would try to get my husband to buy me flowers every weekend. He's just, I don't know what the deal is.
Every weekend?
So there was a time, every weekend, I know, high maintenance. But go to Trader Joe's and buy flowers. I'm not talking about ordering me
Would you call him and tell him this? Or?
So listen,
how obvious did you make it?
So I made it. So first, this is what I did. So first, what I do, I bought myself flowers, and then he'd say, "Oh, I want to buy you flowers." Okay, then buy me flowers. He will forget. So then I will tell him, we'll go to Trader Joe's shopping, and I'll say, "Buy me flowers." So I'll remind him. Then
that's pretty obvious.
Then I was annoyed that I had to remind him to buy me flowers. It got to the point where I had to realize that, hey, this is a guy that is not buying you flowers not because he doesn't love you. He's not buying you flowers because he shows the way he loves you in a different form. And it's obviously not through this way that you want it to be exchanged.
Right.
So I started buying myself flowers, because I realized, hey, you want the damn flowers, give them to yourself.
Yeah.
What's the problem? And he's going to show you his love in so many different ways. So that's another thing. You not only you learn to love yourself, but you also start to realize that there's love language. The book Love Languages, that people around us have a way to show their love to us. And it may not be exactly how we want it, but it's going to be their way. And so how can you also honor their way of loving you versus imposing your idea of how you need to be loved?
Yeah, and wow, I love this. The love languages and love languages with yourself, which is what we've just kind of covered.
And now you see flowers in my home. Those are flowers I bought myself.
Yeah, lots of flowers. Yeah.
So those are the flowers I buy myself because they make me feel great and amazing, and they make my home feel great. And he buys the plants. He's a plant guy. So he's doing his own self-loving therapy.
Oh, they're very cute. Yeah.
He's doing his own self-loving therapy. Yeah.
Okay, so next part. Feelings of abandonment are a byproduct of years of living with gender dysphoria, and as a result, internalizing feelings of guilt and shame. These feelings of guilt and shame lead you to create an inner dialogue that if anyone knew your identity, they would never love you for who you truly are. And then later you say, the way to freedom is through understanding the patterns of behavior that hold you hostage. And this is on the topic of self-sabotage and to stop telling yourself this. So let's expand on that.
Yeah, so, this goes back to what we talked about, the internalization of if the closest person to me, my parent, has rejected that part of me, then obviously you will also reject that part of me, right? And in a way, that creates a cage. And you don't even realize that the cage is superimposed. It's your cage, right? Because not all of us are lucky with caregivers that love us. Some of us grew up with terrible caregivers. And again, that's another myth that I don't believe in, is that you have to love your parents. I think that's bullshit. You don't have to love your parents. Some parents are toxic and horrible, and they gave you birth, and that's all there is to it. But essentially, it's important to realize that certain things that cage us up are again, reinforced and created by ourselves and by our thinking. And it's a way of taking one incident and then blowing it out and generalizing to the rest of our lives. So this happened with these people over here. That means this is the same scenario for everybody else I meet. And the truth is that's not the case.
Right. This is like, I'm just going over this quote again to kind of dig into this more. There's this byproduct of internalizing feelings of guilt and shame.
Yeah.
And how this is tied to also your feeling of not being lovable. Can you talk about that as well?
Yeah, because guilt and shame, especially shame, is such a huge one. Guilt is I did something bad, right? So it's tied to behavior. Shame is I am bad. And shame, runs so deep in trans communities. And so when you think already as yourself as bad, you think of yourself as defective. You think of yourself as broken. So when you think of yourself as broken and defective, immediately what comes to mind is that nobody's going to want something that is broken and defective.
Yeah.
Because again, society reinforces, right?
Yeah, because they don't sell products that are broken and defective.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, so then anything that's broken and defective is not valuable.
But if you think about it, refurbished products are so much better than new ones because
Yes.
they have been through
Go
it.
to the secondhand store.
So no, but what I'm saying is that these things in ourselves that we see as broken, and we all have things that we feel broken, defective. If we work on those things and heal those things, it's analogous to us refurbishing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we healed it, we're that much equipped to be in a relationship.
Yeah, and you're probably better than the one that didn't have to go through the self-healing process because...
There's something else that's going to break in that product. I
Right,
guarantee you.
and then it's
Yeah.
not going to know how to self-heal.
Exactly.
I keep trying to tell cis guys this on dating apps, trying to like differentiate myself with the rest of other women out there. It's like, look, there's a lot of benefits to dating someone who's gone through a lot of personal growth and development. And I just don't think they understand that. So sometimes...
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
okay, yeah.
Exactly. Totally.
Totally different topic.
we need to do a talk about like dating, and we need to do a video about and that's my honey bunny who is coming up, so we need to do a talk about that, about like dating just in general, and the perceptions of dating and the perceptions of ourselves in relationship to dating.
Yeah, I mean, unlovable is like such a strong like word as it relates to this, and shame also probably fits into that really nicely too. I do remember when I was in a long-term relationship, and even without the relationship, my relationships with others was like the shame kind of made my perception of my internal self as ugly. Like, yeah. And then you don't want to show your internal self because you consider it ugly. So you don't ever open your heart completely.
Yes.
And then you don't ever allow yourself to speak completely because you're afraid they'll see the true you, and the true you is ugly because of course you've deemed it to be ugly, and of course you've seen it, and it just becomes a fact of life so deeply. Like I didn't even have a word attached to it. I didn't have like a story where I could tangibly say I don't want them to see my internal self because I'm ugly. It's just like a feeling of not safety when opening up because there's something unsafe inside that I don't want to show other people.
Oof.
You know, like that's kind of how it felt. And I didn't understand this feeling. I didn't understand it really was not normal to have this feeling. And maybe I think across the board, people have a bit of a fear of showing their true selves.
Yeah.
And this is probably conditioned because at some point we were told we can't show our true selves because sometimes we hurt people's feelings, et cetera, et cetera. But like that was so deep. And then years later, once I transitioned and I'm like, look, everything's on the table at this point. Like there's no hiding. Then the feeling of naturally cultivating and hashing through this internal ugly perception kind of transformed into like, actually, I'm a beautiful person. I'm like a very capable person, and I have an amazing heart that can be very vulnerable and expand into the space rather than contract and hide. I mean, that's just like how I am now. And I think like if you can't fully let someone into your heart and you can't really ever allow that space to happen, then you really can't have a true relationship with the person that you're with, because you never let them in there.
Yeah.
And so like, even if you are in a relationship, and I think this is kind of back to that relationship thing, it's like, even if you are in a relationship, if you are suppressing in this shameful way where you're holding yourself back and feeling guilty about it, you can never really let your partner in. And you may be in a relationship that is conditional upon you not allowing your true self to come in, because that's the framework of the relationship that has been set. And so you have this resonance with a person who likes the fact that you don't fully let them in, and it is more transactional like this. Oof. So it's kind of like you also want to, you know, make sure that
yes.
okay. Yeah, it's like you also, like, there may be a dissonance in the transition of you and this relationship, because you may realize that the person you're with is not actually the right person for you, because they're not actually resonant with authentically being.
Exactly. Which is important to acknowledge, because this fear that your partner's going to leave you, that's for a lot of people is a blessing in disguise, right? Because that partner was married to a version of you. People, when they say, but I'm still, because I have a lot of clients who come to me, and they have built what I call the ecosystems. They have marriages, long-term marriages and kids, and they're like, I don't know what to do, but it's for it's getting really worse. And I always say, I guarantee you, first of all, your partner feels something is going on. Like it's like they're picking up on something too. And when people tell me that, but I'm still the same person, nothing about me is that changed, I always say, yes, that is true, but there's still this huge iceberg of who you are too, that plays in effect to everything else, especially interpersonal relationship. So yeah, I'm so glad you said that. That's so beautifully said too. It's very true, and it's as painful as it is to acknowledge. It is so important to acknowledge that too.
Yeah, like, I mean, be the true you, and allow that true you to resonate with the other person.
Exactly.
And maybe they are their true selves, or maybe they're not. Transformation is a very painful process, and a person will not go through transformation unprompted. So if you go through your transformation with a partner, they are going to have to do some level of transformation as well.
100%. This is why, and people have to remember, marriages don't just fall apart when a partner is a trans. They also fall apart in all other marriages. Somebody starts to outgrowing another partner. Why? Because they wanted to level themselves up as human being, and their partner didn't. Yeah, and it falls apart. And people can cry about it all they want, but the reality is that that's the same phenomenon we're talking about, when the person is really becoming their more true authentic selves, and if their partner is also not matching up to their vibration of the true authentic self, that frequency is not going to match. It's going to backfire.
Right. It's like couples that grow together stay together, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That is true. How do you think I lasted 17 years?
Oh my God, 17 years?
Yeah, 17 years.
Oh my God. I saw her partner, by the way, and he looks exactly how I was imagining he would look. Totally.
coming up in a bike gear from bike and from work.
Wise, got the white beard.
Yeah, like, the professor. Yeah. That's my downfall. Older men who look like they're either. I always said I want to marry an older professor. He's not a professor, but he looks like one.
Oh, absolutely looks like one, for sure. Yeah. An older, hotter professor.
Oh, thank you.
Good pick. Yeah. All right, so on to the next part. So this is in the consider this section. Mm-hmm. The first category of fear revolves around the internal aspect of the self. Often this internalized fear is expressed as, I am afraid I will make a mistake, or I am afraid I will realize I am not transgender. So this is on the talking about the internal versus and the external. Mm-hmm. And this is the internal part. I am afraid I will make a mistake, and I am afraid I will realize I am not transgender. Let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, this is an important chapter so consider this part of the book is all the little nuggets I'm trying to make a reader consider in regards to themselves. And this is one where the difference between internal and external fear, because once you understand, it can lend a lot of clarity. A lot of times we are afraid to take those steps, and it's important to ask ourselves, what is it that we're afraid of? If your fear falls into internal category, I'm afraid I will make a mistake, or I'm afraid that I'm not transgender, and I'm afraid that this is not my identity, then this is the fear, in my experience, that warrants self-reflection, that warrants a little bit sitting in. Majority of the time with adults I work with, it falls into external fear. It's not that I'm afraid this is not me, it's more I'm afraid how the circumstances are going to unfold if I do this. I'm afraid people are going to leave me, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job, all external fears.
Yeah.
So this is again fear of I'm afraid I won't be able to handle it. So see the difference? One has to do with uncertainty of identity, and other one is I'm certain who I am, but I'm uncertain about the steps to take and how they're going to play out.
And you kind of touch on that, and I think I highlight that in the next section, which is I'm afraid I won't pass if I transition, or I'm afraid I will lose my loved one.
So those are all external fears.
Right.
Yeah, so it's important to listen. Fears a lot of times are nuggets of like gold within ourselves that tells us things about ourselves. So it's important to listen to them. You don't want to disregard them. I see the internal fear much more with young adults I work with, and that lends to me, well, if you really genuinely feel like you're afraid you're not trans, why we're going to even consider starting hormones if this is your internal fear? That's pretty big fear. Let's first unpack what is it about. But for a lot of adults I work with, it's always an external fear. Because
I'll lose my wife, I'll lose my family.
Because they lived so long with dysphoria. By the time they come into my office, they have two things they almost always ask me. One, please tell me this is not what I think it is, which a lot of times turns out is the reality is it is what you think.
It is.
And as a professional in this field, I'm confirming that you're not crazy.
Yeah.
You know this more than I know at this point.
Yeah.
Even though I'm a professional in this field. And the second thing that almost everybody always asks me, okay, now that we confirm this is what I think it is, and I'm not having middle age crisis, what, if anything, do I need to do about it?
Right.
And that's where we dive deep into the people's circumstances and surroundings.
The steps they need to take. And all of that.
And deciding what, if any, steps they need to take. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, I want to bookmark that for what steps do you take in the external world. But before we get to the external world, because that is the second part, let's go to the internal world for a second. So I am afraid I will make a mistake, and I see this all the time in comments and what people are saying, and it makes sense that a lot of people may discover us when they are confused on YouTube, because the people that may be unsure need to do more research into this to really understand it more. But like, I want to insert something, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on here, which is like, it's natural to have doubts. It's natural to have doubts 100%. In anything.
100%. And I want to be clear that in the first internalized fear, it's not that a person has got to be 100% sure, because seldom people are 100% sure, but you can't be 10% you think you're trans, 90, in other words,
and 90% doubting.
You have to realistically look at what percentage would you give this fear.
Yeah.
So if people say, I'm about 70 to 80% afraid I'm going to make a mistake, to me that's a big percentage. I don't know about you, but to me it's like, okay, let's unpack it. What is that about? What is it?
Yeah, that's a big flag.
That's a big flag.
Yeah.
And usually people who tend to be more uncertain internally are people who experience gender dysphoria suddenly out of the blue.
That'd be me.
People. So did you have that?
Yeah. And it was the way I handled it is I did what you actually recommend in the book, which is like exploring and taking small iterative steps. And it's like, okay, do I like wearing a dress? Okay,
exactly.
Do I like getting pronouns correctly? What if I try on a new name? What if there's people that hang out with me and choose to see me as a woman, and all of these little things. And then eventually you get to hormones. But even still, when I took hormones, I think I was like, yeah, I know I'm not cis, but I don't know if I'm a trans woman or not, but I want to stop the damage of testosterone.
Oh,
you know? And so like, I'll just start taking hormones. And then 6 months into that, it was like, all right, guys, I'm a woman. Sorry. That was bookshelves fall.
I think that's a lot of people tend to do that too. But again, I don't fall. Some people, this is just my opinion. Some people have opinions that even if you're deeply uncertain, you should still go ahead and do the hormones, right? I don't fall into that category because I think there is a lot of great steps in between to try, and they're supposed to be building blocks. They're supposed to be affirming things that you, as you do them, engage with them, you're supposed to go, okay, my percentage just toward me realizing this who I am increased, right? Again, 100% certainty is seldom there, but you gotta start somewhere.
Yeah, and I like this idea of how you're saying kind of like a percentage, like how loud is the doubt versus like the certainty. Move forward and certainty. Yeah. And I feel like, at least for myself, I still occasionally have moments of doubt where it's like, what am I even doing? Like, does this make any sense? Like, should I like just go back transition?
Oh my god!
And then I'm like, well, it's just I am a designer, and like as a designer, you want to look at things from first principles always, because if you could redesign something from the ground up, then how would you design it? It's like how you run a business and make good decisions about a product. So like every now and then I do revisit my initial assumptions and worldview, which is an important thing that I think you should also always consider, is just like how to reevaluate your worldview and see if it matches. But like that percentage is like a 2% or 1% at this point.
That's super important though, because another thing we need to realize, and another thing that we need to talk about more in the transgender field, gender field in general, is that for a lot of people, gender is not fixed. It is mutable, and it tends to change, and it doesn't necessarily have to change drastically from one spectrum to another, but it changes and it evolves. I think as human species in general, this is my belief, I don't believe that we are meant to be heteronormative in our gender presentation and in our sexual preferences. We're actually meant to be, I mean, all of this idea of only, man marrying a woman and sex has to be between man and woman, those are all really Christian concepts if you really
absolutely.
So I think it's really important to realize that as you're going through this things, you may realize that it's like pruning a tree. You're the tree, right? You may realize that I don't need this anymore. This doesn't really resonate with me. Like you said, you started off, you were like, I'm just going to do something because I know that I'm not definitely cis, right? And then you're like, okay, I'm a woman, period. The bookshelves fell. So and that sometimes people do that. Sometimes gender queer space within yourself, gender non-conforming space, the non-binary space is a stepping stone, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is your identity, but you have got to move away from square one, which is, oh shit, I'm so miserable in my gender assigned at birth.
Yeah.
That's obviously something you're not.
Yeah.
So what are you then? Start playing chess and start moving yourself on that board that's called life, until you find the position that feels more comfortable.
Right. It's like, I mean, when you start a game of chess, to just extend this analogy, you have all the pieces lined up. You're like, how do I even get to victory here? I don't even really know. And it's hard to even know how to get to checkmate, because there's going to be so many things that are going to happen in between. You can take it one step at a time. You can take it 3 steps at a time. I don't know if I can go chess master out, because those people just analyze a million games, but you can kind of see how others have done it, see what other people are talking about it, and try and calculate your moves. But you need to make calculated moves, not like exact, precise, perfect moves, because waiting for the perfect moment, it's never going to happen, and that's just going to keep you in this stasis where you're just kind of stuck there.
And to expand on the chess analysis, notice how when you're playing the chess you lose pieces. And sometimes you lose big pieces and you're like, oh shit, my rook is gone. But you also gain pieces from that opponent. And you can imagine that your opponent is also things you're bringing in that you want. So it's not complete loss game. It's something falls off that you no longer need, but something is gained as a result.
Turn that pawn into a queen.
Yes.
Come up out of this. I feel like that's a big one. Okay, so now we'll just move on to the next one, which it's the external part. I wanted to do that with you. So you mentioned this a little bit, which is like finding ways in which you can support yourself externally. But I would love to hear maybe just more tangibly, like some of the things you would recommend for someone working in the external world now, because this is less metaphorical.
Yeah. Well, to combat all of those external fears, the best antidote to it is first and foremost to realize that some of those fears are across a very big bridge, and you have to tell yourself, I'll deal with it when I cross that bridge. You have to focus, what do you have right here in front of you? What is the first one that is the most closer in proximity to where you're at? And so start small, and then as you go, you will also build up the skill set of dealing with any challenges that come your way. And the reality is that we need to realize that a lot of the external fears, like everybody's going to leave me, nobody's going to want me, my family's going to disown me, a lot of times we blow them out of proportion in our headspace, like a fucking balloon. And I mean, the number of clients I have who have friends who are even super conservative, and then they tell me, I cannot believe my friends who are also into shooting guns, they're just totally don't give a shit, they're amazing and they're so supportive. And I'm like, yeah, you'd be surprised, right? So it's one of the things where you just don't know.
Yeah.
And you have to step away from this bubble you created inside of your headspace that everybody's going to not want to have anything to do with you. Some people may turn out to be not people who want to be in your life, but you'd be surprised who's going to be really there and support you throughout. So it's baby steps, really.
Yeah, and good riddance. I mean, like, if someone's not going to accept you for who you are, then you don't want a friend like that, because that means the entire relationship was conditional.
Yeah, but that goes back to the fear of not being lovable, and everybody's going to abandon me. And it's, we're all going through life we're all driving a bus, which is called our life. And we're driving this bus, and we filled up this precious seats in the back seat of the bus with people that will want to be part of our life. And we're clinging to them, and we're thinking, well, what if they all get off? Then I'm driving this bus, which is my life, empty with nobody else. We don't also realize that they will get off, but now you have a space to fill. Mm-hmm. Now you have a seat to fill. Now you now you have energy for somebody else to come into your life. So it's important to realize this exchange that is constantly ongoing through our lives.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful part, when someone shows up as a friend or just someone in your life that takes that new seat where they meet you where you are.
Yeah.
Because that's incredible, because you've built these prior relationships off of a prior premise to where you were in your heart and who you were. Yeah. And now you're like, no, here I am, and I'm just like serving it all up on a platter, and I'm just being vulnerable with you. And those kinds of people that show up at that moment and see you as you are in that moment are the people that are just going to embrace you so much more.
Yes.
And it's a beautiful and wonderful experience. I had a complete reset of my friends, not like in a big dramatic way, but they just kind of faded out into the background. And I got whole new sets of friends that are just way better, partially because I'm way happier, and also because I'm just more me, and now I like default to being who I am.
Yeah, you're attracting those energies that vibrate on the same frequency as you, right? So it just makes it much more wholesome, and the other energies will fade out because you're no longer an energetic match. So it's learning. A lot of transition reminds me so much about learning how to die in life. What I mean is the realization how we're constantly dying, like our cells constantly rejuvenate themselves. Yeah. It's learning how to die by not clinging to attachments, learning how to let things go, to allow other things come in. It really is a dance with a death, the whole transition. Any big transitions in life, not just gender transition, but transition to becoming a parent or to changing your vocation. It is always in the midst of death and in the midst of realizing that things are going to fall away so something new can come up.
Yes, beautiful.
Yeah,
it's like how the forests, when they burn down.
Are you laughing?
I'm laughing because it's like such a sad concept, but it's like, a forest burns down, it leaves all of this really, really prime earth for things to grow out of it. And I'm just thinking of this because my parents, they were close to some of the forest fires, and the fires, they like the whole hill was like just black. It was just covered in soot. And then years have gone by now, and it's just full of life and just covered with so much greenery. It looks way healthier than it ever was before. I always see it as like you are burning down the effigy of yourself, and you are replacing it with something new. But you cannot fully replace yourself unless you let that part of you die. You have to let that die.
Total alchemy.
And it does feel like death. It honestly does. It's super painful, but like
super
it's so
powerful.
worth it.
Yeah, because if you think about it, we're talking about the alchemical concept of like calcinare and mortificare, where the matter has to completely burn down for something else to come out. Think about the phoenix rising from ashes, right?
Yeah.
So it is painful, but it is so necessary. And the more you cling to it, the more painful it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like we're talking about sex here because it's the same concept. There's like that birth and death in that moment, you know, the orgasm.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Okay, next topic. Oh my goodness. Okay, so consider this. And I'm jumping into like the middle of the page. Well, I guess I got to dial it back a little bit. The fear of your sense of self and ability to handle external events. In contrast to internalized fears, this type of fear does not call into question your inner sense of gender identity. If you experience this fear, it may be a good indicator to ensure you have all your ducks in order before starting the gender transition.
And we talked about that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Those lineups, those steps.
Yeah, and make sure your support system is set up. Ensure you have people around you who can be there for you. And I feel like this resonated with me because when I was like a trans lifeline operator, I would get the calls from people who were like in really shitty situations. Really, really shitty situations. Like, I mean, I think the worst situation, there was someone who I try to avoid too much details, but they basically were disabled. They were trans and they had no friends or anyone that could support them.
Yeah.
And they had someone who was stalking them and raped them. And it's just like, you know, like what support? They don't have any support. There's no one there. And the only person that they see is the person that takes them to the hospital every time for their medical appointments. But they're just like stuck in this apartment. And it's like you need to have support in some way, and I was phone support and in a way peer support and community support, and you want to just like make sure you have as much support systems in place for you, like building friendships, building relationships, making sure you have an emergency exit strategy if you need to exit in some way. Stacking away that cash if you can save up money. I remember talking to someone in like East Europe where they could not transition safely. So they've just been for years just working and saving money so they could leave the country and then they could transition. Like, you know, that's the way they got their ducks lined. They're like, I know I'm trans, but I cannot transition here. So I need an exit. And so I was wondering if you could touch on some of the other ways that you think people can kind of like make sure their ducks are in order or create support systems.
Well, I think the support is going to be so paramount. Fortunately, we live in a world today where we have access to, like, look, yours and my channel are, I always tell people, if you don't have nothing, these channels that we create, this is support, right? It is not only the channels, but people who are commenting on a channel are people within your communities. That is support in of itself. So fortunately, we live in a world where we are, for large part, can connect with other people and we can get to know other people. I mean, you and I got to know each other, right? And we don't even live in the same city. So it's important to not be afraid to reach out, because you're not the only one feeling this way. And even if it is online Discord groups that you go to, and even if you don't participate but you listen to others' talks, it's going to help tremendously. The support doesn't have to come in the sense of my family is on board, my spouse is on board, you know, things like that. It can be as simple as I have community, I have one group or I have one content creator that I follow that constantly talks about this stuff and that helps me tremendously. That can be support in of itself. Yeah, it's really hard today, especially now we're recording during this horrific anti-trans legislation times that is going on, right? Yeah. Which makes it, the amount of questions I have people emailing me for my Monday Q&As about what do I do? I'm so afraid. I'm isolating even more. What do I do during this difficult time? So I think it's really important to recognize that it is a difficult time for all of us, but hiding and isolating is not a way to go. And there is so many resources out there. Money, yes, is an issue. Safety is an issue. At the same time, there's still so many free resources aimed to help uplift. I always tell people that if you can't afford my book, and anybody watching, email me, I will send you a free PDF. Like anybody who can't afford my book, you can have a PDF for it, for sure. All you have to do is email me. So those things are out there, and people like me and you, we create them for that reason, to create support and to create a way to empower and uplift people.
Yeah.
You just have to open up to that, and you have to see it for what it is too. Sometimes I think, like with the person you described, things in life can be so horrendous and so painful, and they can be one after another where it snowballs into something so big that you as a person start becoming hopeful and hopeless and helpless, where you start feeling that, I can't talk right now because we've been talking so much, but you get to the point where you're just jaded in humanity and you feel like people are just going to do you harm. And I encourage anybody who feels like they're in that position to realize that that is not true. Right? There's so many people who actually mean, and there's so many allies right now. There's so many people who are not even speaking up, who generally don't really mind having trans people in their lives. They're just not speaking up, but it doesn't mean that they're, so the world is not as bad as we think it is. So,
right. It's like the loudest are the people that are on the edges and have more extreme opinions, but the general majority, I would say, is like,
exactly. And you have to realize who's having those opinions. They're all big platforms that have megaphone, right? And they're utilizing it in this horrible way. But the reality is that majority of the people, they're very supportive.
Yeah, and I mean, social media caters to people that are engaging in this way too. So like the controversy gets the engagement, it drives the engagement, and Facebook and TikTok all know this. So and Twitter, they allow the controversy to exist because it thrives and creates more engagement. So you also have to think about how you're perceiving the world and how much you actually allow social media to color your perception of what's happening in the world.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is further along. It's called Get Your Own Cookie Cutter, which I thought was a really great title because I was like, wait, what? Why are we talking about cookies all of a sudden? I love cookies, but like, what is the metaphor here?
Bacon. Is this a cookbook all of a sudden?
Yeah, exactly. So then I'll just read the most important piece that I saw here. It's from my perspective, it's the most important piece, which is, that's why it's important to find your cookie cutter. The cookie cutter that better resonates with you, and carve out your own cookie, aka how you identify. So this is talking about unrealistic versus realistic expectations, and how you're focused on the external world and how media creates an image of what things are. And then you introduce this concept of how you need to have your own cookie cutter. Tell me more about that.
Yes, this is all about having your individuality, which I think is so important as a trans individual, because I feel that trans people more than ever today are being bombarded from I would say like three sides, like triangulation happening. On one side, you're getting bombarded by realization that who you are, and then suddenly you're meeting all these external realities of how you're supposed to live up to that particular ideal of gender presentation. On the other side, you're also bombarded by this like double duality telling you what you're not out to be, and then finally you're bombarded by trans community itself telling you how you're supposed to transition and what steps you need to take. So it's all this, and let's not fool ourselves. There's a lot of that in trans community where people, people have sent me TikToks of trans identified TikTokers who would say that if you're not transitioning, you should not be calling yourself trans, which in my opinion is complete bullshit. So you're getting also this pressure from the community itself telling you how you're supposed to do, and if you're questioning your gender, you should definitely start hormones, and you cross-dressing, you're definitely a trans. It's just like all the things people projecting from their milieu and their experiences. So it's really important to realize that what you're doing when you allowing all these voices to affect and to create roadmap for your transition, if transition is for you, or for you even identity, how you want to show up as yourself. You're basically giving imagine like you're trying to mold yourself as a cookie, and you're giving this cookie cutter to everybody else. So you're having like this one chef come in and they like, you should be this way, and then your mom comes in and she's like, no, you should be this way, and then somebody from trans community comes in and they're like, no, this cookie should be this. in the end, you're gonna have one fucked up cookie. Like it's gonna be like, what the fuck is
No one's
this?
gonna want to eat that cookie.
Why do we have salt here with chocolate? Like what? Like you're gonna have the things that don't meant to go together because
Salt and chocolate is good though.
it's like, well, maybe that's your cookie.
Yeah, just don't
But you know
put
what I
vinegar
mean?
on it.
Exactly. It's this analogy having too many chefs in the kitchen.
Yeah.
You have to be your own chef, and you have to take control of the cookie cutter, and you have to ask yourself, who am I?
Yeah.
Now, it's sometimes you need all of those things to kind of bounce back and figure out who you are. And sometimes we do modeling, sometimes we do imitating, sometimes we copy somebody. I'm sure people watch you and they're like, oh, I'm going to be like Ashley, and I'm going to do my hair like Ashley, and you know what I mean? And I'm going to have eyeglasses exactly like Ashley. I'm sure some people watch me and they're like, oh, I'm going to have red lipstick, and I'm going to have, bangs and Edna look.
Keep it all black.
And Edna look, and keep it all morbidly black like Dr. C. It's fine. Like there's people that I still emulate. In different pockets of my identity. That is a fine starting point, but it's important then within that to constantly be open to finding out which one of those elements is actually you and which one of those elements is not. So holding on to the cookie cutter is super important.
Yeah, I call this, this is a part of what I'm calling it, but I think it's a larger concept you're talking about. But I call it transcending the trans. Because a lot of people kind of identify and keep attached to a model that's configured within the trans identity, and then they say that's who I am, and then that's where I go from. And maybe this is more in the social media world where this I am trans and this is trans, this is everything I am, because that's a place where you can speak and get a lot of exposure. But I also think when you're going through a process of such massive transformation that consumes all of your time and consumes your life, it's very easy to get wrapped up in that in such a way where you go, well, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And if you have not gone through if you have not gone through the fire enough times by the time you reach the transition, then you're not going to have a solid enough self and foundation for identifying where you are and where you stand as you go through this very disorienting transformation and swirl of ideas and experiences and things. So it's very easy to get lost within this template that's kind of served you through social media, like all of the trans people that like certain memes, like the shark meme, or like the thigh highs meme.
What's with the shark meme? I never. Somebody else, I have a client, I have a young adult client and they're like, Dr. G, don't you know the shark meme? I'm like, what the fuck is, I'm like, what the shark has to do with
blaha.
I don't get it.
So I think it started on Reddit. It's a transgender, like r/transgender, and some people started posting pictures of this shark, and everyone really liked the shark, and it's an IKEA shark. And then, like, the trans community just, like, latched onto it. I don't have the full story, to be honest.
So the shark's supposed to represent trans person?
It really represents a meme within the trans community. So it's not really...
so the community is going to bite...
It's an insider thing now. It's like, Blaha is, like, the mascot for the trans community. But, like, the shark is not... the shark is not an analogy to being trans. It's just like it's just a
there's danger within the community
of it. It's not even like, it doesn't even have any more meaning beyond that.
Oh my God,
it's like the shark, the tooth, nothing represents anything.
Obviously, memes are like not they're happening during my time period, but they're not my generation. So I'm like and people tell me sometimes your video title. There was one video title. It's such a clickbait, and I had to Google clickbait because I didn't. I was like,
okay,
what's a clickbait? And then I read and I said, no, it's not a clickbait. It's just a title I came up with. But anyways, we're off the rails.
There's no. That's what we do on my channel. Is we go way off the rails.
Oh, that's good.
Oh my God.
The thing about going back to the cookie cutter is that people, when you're told to remember that essentially, ideally, what we're all doing in a lifetime, and you're going to really resonate with this concept, is we're evolving into more authentic version of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Within different spheres of influence. And gender, just for people who struggle with dysphoria, happen to be the currently predominant for those people who struggle with it sphere of influence. But all of us, myself, I constantly strive for authenticity within different aspects of myself.
Yeah.
And those things are not, it's difficult because we're so modeled with societal crap it's I always make analogy, we're born whole and then we get fragmented. And then when we get fragmented, our mom, our parents, dad, our teachers, friends, society start layering us, and we become like this layered big fat onion. And then we come to the junction in our life where we go, wait a second, that's not fucking me. And so we start peeling the layers. We're like, oh shit, that's societal. Oh shit, that's not true. Oh my God, this is such a colonized idea of gender concepts. Oh my God, this goes back to the natural law, which is not even, actual science. So you start peeling this fragments, and then you find yourself in the midst of it naked, and then you go, well, who am I, right? And so the job to go through life and to reclaim those things that were whole to begin with, that got fragmented, to find them and to reel them in.
Yeah. I would go one step further in asking myself, and this is how I phrased it to myself, is I said, what am I? Because it's like, what is consciousness? Like, what is my presence? Like, am I like a soul in a body? Am I like just a body and a brain? Am I a collective consciousness of like bacteria and all these other things that are within my body? Like, am I an us? Am I we? Like, what are we? What is I? What am I?
Oh, girl, you're going there. Oh, that is that. Yes, I do know. But you're really getting into deeper concepts, which is one of the reasons why I love occult so much, because in ritualistic magic, it's all about trying to get to know your higher guardian angel, which is really realization that you are all of it. You are it.
Yeah.
You are part, like you and I are once, like we're all together. There's no I, there's no separation.
Right.
So it all goes back to oneness.
Yeah, it's like an us.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, okay, but on this cookie cutter concept, there's like this interesting duality, because like on one level you're saying like find your own cookie cutter in the context of don't become what everyone else says you should be.
Yeah.
Find your true self. And then there's like this other layer, which I would say is almost like on top of it or maybe below it or both, which is like you're going through the process of reformulating yourself. And in reformulating yourself, you are stepping into the premise of that you are going to create your own cookie cutter. However, the trappings of doing this is you may stick to a cookie cutter that is already served to you when you go through this process. I think people talk about how you transition and you move, you step out of the closet and then you move yourself into another trappings of like another closet. And maybe this is touching upon this idea of like, well, like for a binary trans person, like I went from a cis male to non-binary, but then ultimately into trans female. And I wouldn't say that I am really breaking a lot of the the visual molds of like what's expected of a trans woman. So in some respects, I've fallen into another cut of reinforcing heteronormative types of like what it is to be a woman. But then there's another layer of it. Well, I had to reason from first principles what I want to keep and what I don't want to keep. And just by going through that process, I have authentically cultivated the self that is me and that I want and desire to be. And on some superficial levels, I may appear as like a typical cis woman in some ways. I hope I appear as a cis woman, but it's not required that I pass. But like on another level, my definition of self and my definition of what it is to be a woman is like, I've kind of made this up in my head, and I was going to kind of put this on my dating profile, but I don't know if I really would. But it's like a woman should be able to cook, run a business, and automate all the cleaning because she has a business that produces enough value to then just do all the other things. And like, to me, that kind of represents my approach to life, which is, yes, there's a certain level of just like, I want to be a woman as like a woman I perceive exists, and I just want to exist that way. I don't need to perpetuate that. I don't need to force that onto anyone else. Mm-hmm. But also there needs to be a level of capability and capacity within my own ability to then have, like, to be able to take care of everything. And the way that I see that is through my own entrepreneurship, my own ideas, and the things that I can create in this world that create enough value that I can then automate all the other things that I need to do. So yes, like a woman can be in some ways adhering to what the concept of a woman is in a larger society, but they can also be broken down. So like there's many layers to this cookie where you can cut it in all sorts of ways.
Yes.
You know, and it's deep because you're reasoning from first principles. Do you keep this? Do you keep that?
Yes, and sometimes the cultural, social stereotypes and constructs of what it is to be a woman or a man are going to be part of your cookie, and you're going to be okay with it, and you're going to know that they're constructs and they're societal bullshit, but somehow bullshit still resonates with you, and that's okay too. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's not about just completely detoxing those notions. I don't think you can, because you don't exist in a vacuum, so you're still going to be touched by all those things. But yeah, and it's important to realize that your cookie is going to change as you evolve, and therefore your cookie cutters that you're going to hold in your hands are also going to change as you evolve. That's the whole point.
Yeah, and like I think the shaping of the cookie cutter as you go through this process is kind of like a deep questioning of yourself, because I don't like when you get asked a question, like, and try and kind of feel this maybe, like when you get asked a question, how does it feel within your awareness and your consciousness? There's this, like, when I get asked a question, I feel like there's something that starts operating below my conscious awareness, and then suddenly an answer kind of arrives.
Yeah.
And then you get like words, right? And like this is the cookie cutter forming process, is you do things almost as a question and you allow the thing to kind of rise up, and that becomes what you start to identify as, oh, maybe this is the self. But then like what is
But then
the
your
self?
mind gets in a way.
Yes.
But this is you. So you basically, I think what you're saying is being able to listen to your inner voice and to trust yourself.
Yeah.
People and anybody who's watching who is not sure about their gender, if you were just to sit down and close your eyes and just really sit with your heart and your feelings and to ask yourself, am I comfortable with my gender assigned at birth? You will immediately get an answer rising up. You will. What happens next is that we as humans disregard what this part of our better self tells us about ourselves, because then our mind gets in the way,
Right.
and ego gets in the way, and then we go, the minute you go, that's right, I'm not comfortable, then your brain goes, are you fucking kidding me? Are you nuts? What are you talking about? You're crazy, you're brainwashed, you watch too many, I don't know, transgender YouTubers talking about it. There's no way, you know, it's like all of the things. It's the same thing with everything else that we need to attune to, right? So there's the books that I wrote after I wrote this book that I just had, like I wrote it, but I just wasn't feeling it. So I sat with myself, right? What came up for me is that your heart is not into this book. Like this is not the book you want to, just your heart is not into it. It had nothing to do with transgender community. It has to do everything on fear. It related to fears. And then my mind took over those feelings. But you need this book because you want to push yourself on speaking platforms, and this is how you're going to, right? All this rationalizing why I should keep it. So I had weeks and weeks sitting with it, and I had to come to conclusions that I need to trust this, then I need to trust this before I trust this.
Yeah.
So the same thing, how can you sit with this? That's the most authentic cookie cutter is already within ourselves. We just don't listen.
Yeah. Well, like, it's hard for the heart to use words because it has no words through which it can express itself. Mm-hmm. And it's reliant upon the user of the heart to be able to translate those signals into words because the brain's up here. So it's like, if you have a good interpreter of those feelings, then you can allow those feelings to influence and mold and help shape words that you can then tangibly hold on to and recognize. But if you're so used to being able to suppress these feelings and lock them out, because it literally feels like a feeling that can rise up through your heart, and then it can get stuck in your neck, or like you can kind of just interject somewhere up here. And it's like, if you've been suppressing and holding this back for a very long time, you've gotten really good at like not listening to this feeling and this heart that rises up here in this area. So like there's like a skill that comes with like learning to deconstruct that translation layer that's corrupted. Mm-hmm. It's like a corrupted translation layer. And then you kind of have to reinsert like a healthier translation layer and getting in touch with it. So I don't know, for me, getting in touch with my body was like super important for that process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think so many people are disconnected from their body. That's where dissociation becomes really big. It's really important to start grounding yourself. And the truth is, if you sit with yourself and you hear what comes up, I guarantee you, instantaneously, you will feel free and liberated. And it's going to feel so good before it gets to your mind and your mind start telling you all the things you shouldn't do.
Yeah.
You know, there's like freedom in that. There's like freedom, there's something, and that's how you know that that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I have this with bottom surgery, actually. It's like really, I can't ask myself the question in words. I can't be like, should I get bottom surgery? And then it's like, kind of like, oh, well, maybe, like, I'm not sure. But then visualizing myself, looking at myself in a mirror with bottom surgery has happened. I have a vagina. And then that's when all the feelings come up. And it's like, that's how I communicate to the subconscious, and it communicates back. It doesn't do it with words. It's just not adept at using words. Because words in a way are also like, I mean, this is a whole nother topic, but like, I'll just say just a little bit, which is like, words are kind of like a flawed abstraction of like so much more complexity that cannot be expressed in like one word. Like, I love you has so much more meaning than just like what it is. And like trying to understand and interpret that is just so much more. So I won't go more about
Another video.
a whole nother video. We've still got some more things to get through on your book. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So then this is under your section called Build Houses, Not Castles.
Yeah, and that's from the section on your own terms, I think.
On your own
Consider
terms.
This, yeah.
This is like, is this the
this
main?
is like empowering section. Well, there's like different, consider this, there's things to think about. Then on your terms are almost, or maybe it's, I think it's on I'll have to look in a book. I think.
Here's the book.
I think it is. But what did you highlight in that?
Yeah, here. So I'll highlight it. So here's my secret. Start, and it's page 59.
Okay. So it considers this still.
Okay. So here's my secret. Start building small houses of individual wins, and soon enough, you will have an entire city. Start sharing each house with everyone around you instead of keeping it secret. Stop waiting to feel confident until you are ready to share. Realize confidence comes with the sharing, showing up, and owning who you are. Exclamation point.
Yes.
It's like, yes, Dr. Z, let's go.
Yes, it's so important. This is the analogy of build houses, not castles, came to me when I pictured what happens when a kid sitting on a floor and the kid is surrounded by Legos and the kid is building this mansion and they're like so giddy and excited to share it. You know, they're like, oh my God, I'm so excited. And then a parent or anybody comes in and they accidentally walk through it and they trash it all and it just falls to pieces. And then you're like so crushed.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that analogy. And in fact, I had a client I was working with where this analogy came to me, and I explained to the client that because this client is in a relationship and every time they will do something that's like, will try and lipstick and their partner would be just like, oh my God, what's happening to you? You look so unattractive. It's like crushing their castle.
Yeah.
And so this person wanted to just completely hide themselves. And it's important to realize that when we build castles, meaning we suddenly do everything all at once, when that gets crushed, it's so painful.
Yeah.
But if we do just little tiny houses, each one representing different thing. This one is me trying on this new lipstick. This one is me coming out to my friend. This one is me just journaling about my feelings. This one is me trying on pronouns. So then when one of them gets crushed, let's say you're trying on pronouns and somebody's not respecting your pronouns, you still have this houses around you that are making you feel more affirmed and confident.
Yeah.
And those also the relationship you have to other houses are also making you that much more like to rebuild this one. When you rebuild it, you learn skill set to deal with painful, challenging situations.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you have a whole village to yourself, right? So you just like, you build this like network of your own experiences versus having one big castle.
Yeah, and I love that framing, and it without that framing, I feel like it's easy to forget that all of these small wins are individual small wins, because you can tie it all to like one thing.
Yeah.
So then it feels like if someone misgenders you, it can suddenly topple your entire sense of self. If you're earlier in your transition, like I actually got misgendered just like a few days ago, and it actually like it made me cry for a moment. Because someone very close to me misgendered me, and so that just cuts a little deeper, because it means
does.
like, yeah, it's just like someone that I know I interact with still hasn't grown in this dimension. And the person was saying, well, you know, this person hasn't fully like developed or been able to process this. They're under a lot of stress. And I was like, it's not about them. This is about my feelings and my experience. And I need to just allow myself to experience this feeling and then just let it go, because I'm at a point now where I have more than just houses. I feel like I have an entire city, or like I just have a lot of infrastructure in myself now. And this just grows over time. But when you start, everything, I mean, there's just nothing there. Like you're just like plowing the earth. You're just like, let me get the construction tools out. Let's kind of clean out some space, maybe for like a campfire, you know, like a little tent where like hopefully the wind doesn't blow too hard and it won't knock over our tent.
Oh my gosh, you're so funny. I think that can be true, but I think a lot of people already start out from having other houses in place, right? And it's just the fear that you're going to lose them in your village, right? But that you're building this one central house that represents you. But yes, a lot of times it's like literally remodeling the housing, which is also you, and as a metaphor. It's like, okay, we're going to demolish this and we're going to start all over.
That one down.
Because it's like this is not working out for me. And yeah, it's really, I love how you mentioned infrastructure, because that's what I'm talking about too, is building that internal infrastructure. And it doesn't mean that when your little houses get crashed that it doesn't hurt. It does. Like it hurt you when that happened to you, right? And you had to process it. But you'll be in that much more position to move on versus if you did not have this infrastructure.
Yeah, and it's not like Godzilla came by and knocked over a bunch of buildings. It's more like there was like a swell and like maybe like someone kicked a door.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to take it with the scope of everything else.
Yeah, when you said infrastructure, I was like, make sure you got that Wi-Fi, make sure you've got the electricity, like, but I mean, I don't know how far that analogy goes, but I think I see this sometimes as a flaw in some people who are transitioning, where they get triggered by something that then causes them to react in an overreactive way.
Yeah.
And that to me, if we're using this house analogy thing, it's like they've just taken all of the little houses and they've conflated it all into like one big house. And now that whatever is in a juxtaposition or conflict is threatening the entire house. And like that's where you get kind of like a different relationship with your identity and your transition, I suppose.
Yeah, I think we are our own worst enemies at times.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is a learning process about ourselves and taking an opportunity within those learning experiences to figure out what we can do about them, right? Because some people, they're just like, they get also something triggers them to such extent they will destroy their houses themselves, you know?
Shit.
And that sucks, but it does happen. And sometimes we need to self-destruct in order to learn that in the future we don't have to go to such extent. So we're all different and everybody copes with things differently.
Yeah.
These are just like suggestions, don't build a castle and just build houses, but then how you operate your village and how you take care when there's a fire in one of the houses is up to you. And it's going to be always going to be a learning lesson.
Yeah, and I just like reframed it even in my own head, because when you're talking about how different people have their own perspectives and how they work differently, and we're talking about don't build a castle, build houses, it can also be build a city. Don't just build a castle.
Well, the castle is also lonely. If you think about the castle, you think about a very tall structure. It seems to be above everything else, right?
Yeah.
So it's very lonely and it's a protective. Every myth story has a princess up in the castle,
A lot
right?
of stones.
Exactly, and it's like meant to protect, to, right? And the castle used to be headquarters, right, in a city of like a king or a queen. So it's important to not isolate yourself. You can't fully ever protect yourself, and every tactics that we do in order to insulate ourselves from getting hurt is actually hurting us back more.
Yeah. there's so many analogies on there, but I think the underlying concept is just, it's very good. I think it's a very healthy way of kind of sorting through your internal self too.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, like I just got hurt, but that was just like a little piece of infrastructure or some part of me, not the entire thing. And it's not representative of that. And I guess you do get more resilience over time. Like there's sort of like this momentum where the paper cuts don't really hurt so much anymore. And then you're just like, yeah, like whatever. Like I think the most hurtful thing for me earlier in my transition was like not being seen.
Oof,
and then like at some point not being seen was no longer a problem. But then it was like, well, someone refuses to date me even though they're attracted to me because they found out I'm trans. And that kind of like underlines the fact that I'm trans, you know? But then like I've kind of moved past that. And so there are layers and there's like this impermanence to the struggle that you're dealing with, and a misperception of your future projection would be to think that this pain continues to last in the way that it exists today, and that you allow that to stop you or inhibit you from moving forward because it doesn't stay the same. You're just naturally going to rebalance.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential trappings of seeing everything through a myopic view when people going through transition and applying certain hurts or experiences as the experiences that are going downfall later, and that's not the case. And I mean, I have a chapter, rejection is redirection in there too, that touch bases on like digging and realizing that sometimes, you know, just like you go on a date, I'm sure, with some people and it doesn't work out for you. Are you rejecting them? No, you're exercising your discernment. So we have to remember that too. You probably do have it highlighted.
I don't know. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. Just went through that.
I'm like, girl, you highlighted a lot. Well,
I was just like, yes. We have to cover these.
I am glad it resonated.
So this is the part of your book, chapter 7 of, I guess, this last section. Confidence trumps passing, health trumps all. And the part I highlighted was, your line needs to be grounded in the awareness of your reality and your circumstances, such as how many years your body has been exposed to estrogen or testosterone, your genetics. I should probably like take it back one notch because this is talking about your idea of passing and what's important and how you look and like how you present. And
a person's idea of passing, yeah.
Yes, and you're, I think you say a lot of really important stuff here, which I think sometimes may not be mentioned, which is you also need to be grounded in reality. Like some things are just like, it's the nature of your reality. Yeah. Like if you wait a very long time to transition and you're, let's say, a trans woman, then like testosterone is going to have affected you. Your genetics affect you. Your access to hormones affects you. Your overall health, the resources that you have, all of these things exist. And then you go on to say, chasing that which is unachievable given your situation or context will end up eating away your self-confidence and self-worth and will destroy your mental health. Now imagine this. What if the goal of your gender transition was not to pass, but to be a healthier version of you? And I just like this where you go, think about it, exclamation point.
Oh my God, that's funny. That sounds like me, because I tend to be so direct on my channel, so direct with my clients. Yeah, this also ties back to that idea of that fear people have. What if I'm going to be ugly, right? Touches base on the same thing, but most importantly, this chapter and what you picked out is about, you know, when people realize their identity, suddenly there becomes a little bit of comparison of that identity to an ideal that they see out there. And that's normal, right? So I'm sure when you realize...
God, all the time. Still happens every now and then. And it's just like, you got to re-ground yourself. And I hear this a lot as an issue. It's like, I get jealous when I see someone who has had a better transition. Yeah. And like that, I mean, it's very natural to compare yourself to something you think is analogous to you. the way that I kind of step out of this is I go, well, you don't know their life story. You don't know exactly what their experience is. And if you were to switch places with them, you'd be a totally different person. And you would also have to sign up for all of their experience, everything that they have. Do you really like hate your own experience so much so that you would want to switch that,
I love that
with someone else? And who would you even be at that point? You would be them. So yeah, I mean, that's how I dial it back, and I do reality check, like your life is your life.
I love that.
It's not perfect. There's flaws. You can amplify these flaws as much as you want, but you have what you have. Let's move forward with that. That's kind of just where I end up.
I really love that. I think it's really important. And again, what you picked out in the chapter, it touched bases on it's okay to have an ideal, right? It's okay. And I see this a lot where people are like, people attribute their own understanding, and we're talking again people for whom passing matters, because again it's not for everybody, but everybody tends to assign their own idea of what that would mean. And I would ask people, well, what would that look like? And then they would say, oh, that's when I can just go out without any makeup and look all disheveled and distressed and people gender me properly. Or some people will say, oh, when I look like Marilyn Monroe, or like
someone gorgeous,
somebody
right?
gorgeous,
yeah.
right? And
Iconic,
flawless, or it's like we all have our own ideas, and that is fine to have. It's important then to say, okay, so this is, let's put a flag here, like this is what we're trying to achieve, right? And now let's look what's on the way to that flag. And we start off with what is your age, right? Because it's the reality is that if you are trans feminine identified, we have to factor in how much testosterone has affected you, right? And within that, what is your genetics? How has you, if you're striving, if you're saying, I want to look like Marilyn Monroe, you're talking about this really kind of borderline voluptuous, curvy, feminine physique, right? I think that's fair to say, with kind of fuller features. And if your genetics and your exposure to testosterone unfortunately gave you a much different skeletal physique, that is something that we have to factor in, because while there will be some redistribution of body fat, we just can't, that's just not going to be taken away.
Yeah,
right?
So much surgery would have to be done, and some surgeries just not even possible.
There's some surgeries are not even possible.
Yeah.
And that's important to, some people say their ideal is to be able to birth a child, and it's like, okay, I think that's important to acknowledge how so many trans women want to birth a child, and I think that's really painful to hear, and it breaks my heart. And some people write to me and they'll say, well, look, there's research, they're doing this uterus transplant, and I don't want to be the shit person telling them, but the truth is we live in society where when that's going to be possible, they're going to push cis women first. The emphasis is going to be for cis women to get the surgeries, because it's we operate in a society where it's a place of privilege that gets first pick, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's important to look at where you what is your contacts, what is your access to resources?
Yeah.
Can you get access to hormones? If yes, great. Do you want to have surgeries? Yes. Okay. What is the likelihood of you getting surgeries, whether with insurance or without insurance, right? So all of the things, circumstances have to be factored in. And when they're factored in and we look at it from that point of view, now we're reshaping this flag, this ideal, into a more realistic version of you.
Yeah, what is achievable.
It's important to also acknowledge and laugh and respect that, because I've been lifting weights since January. I'm trying to recomp my body, and I'm 6 months in and I'm like, where's my muscles? And I want to be like some athletic women that I see that have recomped their body, but my body works differently. Maybe it's a slower process. I don't know. Maybe it's the food that I eat. It's a combination of things. It's how my body also works with everything. So for people, it's the same thing. For some people, the hormones are so receptive and they do amazing things for them. For some people, the body doesn't metabolize. Look at the trans guys. Some guys can go years, 3, 4, 5 years until they grow facial hair. And some people, it's instantaneously.
Right, and some people get the chiseled jawline, and some people don't.
Yeah, you just gotta we're so inundated, I feel, today with a lot of people on social media who have transitioned, who are flaunting their results, and we have to realize that you have to ask yourself, why would somebody flaunt their results? Probably because they had lots of access to resources, or because they did it when they were young and not really affected by hormones, and so everything went really well for them, so they're flaunting it.
And
People
they're
who-
also a subset, right? Because the ones that are not good looking won't rise to the top of the social media chain.
Well, that's another thing, and it's important to factor all the things in. There's a great Instagram account by a friend of mine. It's called it's by Casey Brider. What is it called? I'm gonna have to look it up.
Yeah.
But it's something. Oh my God, I can't remember it.
It's okay, it'll
I recommend it all the time.
yeah.
But what I love about Casey's account is that she will post and people will send her transformation of them before and after pictures. And it's very diverse in age, it's very diverse in demographic. And it's a great way to see how different it is and how people turn out to be. So it's not just like young
It's
and
not
beautiful.
edited like
It's not,
glow-ups.
no, and it's
Yeah.
not young. It's just like, sometimes I will see somebody who looks like in their 60s and I'm like, this is fucking great. That's what we need to realize, is that people telling their stories, but we seldom see people telling the struggling story or how challenging it is. And if you want to make it easier for yourself, it all starts with having a more realistic ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd also say estrogen is like the elixir of youth. That has definitely reversed my age. And I think every trans woman will say that.
Yeah, I heard that. It tends to yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because if you look at cis population, right? Technically speaking, actually men tend to age better than women,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, right.
So it's interesting.
How did that work? I don't really understand.
I don't know, but hey, yay, that's all good.
Yeah, no.
That's a good thing.
And I mean, like, there's another advantage, which is like if you are injecting hormones, or not even injecting, but if you're just taking hormones, then you can also maintain a certain level of cheek fat that cis women will lose because they go through menopause. But if you're just taking hormones, then you would never really go through that phase. So there's like a certain level of fat distribution advantage that you get in the late stages of a transition.
Oh my God.
But like, yes, I mean, there's just like the gravity of your situation, whatever situation you're in, you kind of have to make the best of it with what you have, and deem the correct level of effort and resources that you want to put into it to make it what you want it to be. And whether that's financial resources, support resources, mental resources, personal development time, like whatever you need to do, like put that energy into it, and be okay with, this is what I would tell myself, so don't necessarily take this, but be okay with 80% of what you wanted to get.
Yes, 80% is actually huge. I know to some people it may sound like, but that's not 100. And I think some personalities are so perfectionistic, they need the 100%.
That's me.
But the reality is that 80% is fucking huge.
Yeah.
And anybody who's successful will always tell you 80% is the key.
Oh, great, I'm successful then.
No, I mean, like anybody 80% rule is there's actually a book, 80% rule.
Yeah, right.
Out there.
Right.
So 80% is huge. Anybody who is into body fitness and stuff, every book will mention 80% consistency. You don't have to be 100% consistent. Same applies here. You get yourself to 80% of your version, and you're gonna be better. Or aren't you happy?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Or you like the 100%?
Well, I'm a perfectionist, so I want 100%, but I also acknowledge that pursuit of 100% is an endless pursuit that you'll never get to, because your expectations and definition of what 100% get more refined the further you get along, and that scale just keeps going.
You're chasing the invisible rabbit down the lane, and the rabbit doesn't exist.
Yeah,
and you think it does, but
you're never going to reach the end, because like 100% always moves.
Yeah.
And so like if you just say, all right, I reached 80%, which is roughly good, I'll just like, I know there's more, but like to try and get that more is going to be impossible. It's going to be like just so much time, resources, energy. Like I think the biggest thing for me in terms of investment of resources was paying for my facial feminization. Like that was the biggest expense that I've ever had in my entire life. And it's like so much money I saved. Like the down payment for a house just disappeared because it went into, my face. Just shoved the house into my face.
Well,
that's where it went.
I always say that when it comes to money related to transition, that there's certain investments, minor investments, that are considered to be net positive investments. Changing yourself, because this is the phase you're going to lead your life is a positive investment. Me, you don't even want to know how much my doctorate degree was. It's like,
oh, true.
This
Yeah.
is probably like 5 facial feminizations. Is a house.
And you have loans attached to that too.
We're investing in a house that nobody can foreclose on. Like nobody can foreclose on
my face.
I didn't want to say that, but you went there. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I'm sorry, we need your face back.
Yeah. So it's just like there's some investments that are wasteful. The minute you buy that expensive car and it leaves the dealership, it's depreciated. The minute you buy your new cell phone, a new TV, but when you invest in things for yourself, like education, self-growth, facial feminization, that is a net positive investment, even if you're going to be in debt and paying that off.
Yes, and this is where the 80% rule is very important for trans people when they are paying for surgery, is to not try and push it to 100%.
Yeah.
Because when you do, that's the obsession of like 12 nose jobs and like 13 chin jobs and all these other things where you're never happy. And I was talking to my surgeon, Dr. Kiojampa, where I was like, how often do you see these types of people? Because it's the first thing that gets mentioned to you by your friends when you say, I want to get facial feminization. Yeah. They're like, don't become one of those obsessed people that take it all the time and like are doing all this, which it's an archetypal story. And yes, it exists, but it's an extreme example that rarely exists. And I was talking to Dr. Kiojampa about this, and he said, I rarely see those kinds of patients, and I turn them away. And you can typically tell when you're talking to them because other surgeons will not work with them, and they're working on something that doesn't exist anymore. And I think that's the part. That's the 100%. It's like there's nothing there. There's nothing wrong with your nose anymore. You're just pursuing this imaginary thing.
Yes.
And I just want to kind of sneak this one thought in there, which is maybe they don't want it to be over. And like that pursuit of that perfection is their own denial because they don't have anything else to work on.
That's
shade.
But I will second that. I don't think it's true for all, but I will second that. That is definitely it possible. And by the way, of course, you had to put out your house loan because you went to one of the best. Kyle is one of my best doctors to recommend.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
He's a wonderful guy.
I love him. Yes.
Yeah, he's a wonderful man. But you know, here's the thing though, and I actually had a client who their biggest concern was, I'm afraid to go down the surgical route and then it will never stop. What I see is that people feel so liberated to just move on with their life. You know, even if there's still some things, minor corrections that they want to do, and the corrections often happens with gentle surgeries that they want to do, it's usually like, I will do it later, but I just need a break. Like, it's so exhausting to go through transition that people just really, a lot of my clients, they're like, I just want to fucking move on and live my life, you know? Yeah. And that's what also society doesn't realize, is that the difference between this and any other, when they compare this to like, well, we don't tell somebody with anorexia that they're, you know, we don't support them. The difference is that here, once people achieve congruency, they're fucking out of my office. They're living their lives. And they don't have the distress they had before. So it's important, you're right, not everybody's going to fall into that gap. But I think when people do, that's also part of it. It's just that you now, this became your main narrative. This became your focal point of your story. And you don't know how to be anything other than transgender person that is going through transition.
Shit, what a trap to be in.
It is a trap, and it's unfortunate. And again, you know, that happens, you know.
It's just human nature. There's all sorts of humans. And
sometimes, like I said, we're our worst enemy. We will trade one story narrative for another, and then we'll create another cage within a liberated cage for ourselves.
Yeah.
But still be prisoners of our own lives.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I have a warrior personality, and I feel like
you do.
Without fighting, I don't know if I have.
You do. That's another thing, though. You have to, you come across to me as somebody who is, if there's a struggle in your life or a challenge, you may give yourself a day or two to just be a victim and, oh no, this, you know, but then you're like, fuck this, I'm gonna just do my best. You're not somebody who sits in the victim mindset. The reality is that not everybody's like you, and I'm like that too. I cannot stand victim mindset. This is why I'm so direct. Some people can't work with me because I'm too much of a pusher for them. Mm-hmm. some people are more predisposed to exist within the realm of victimness and feel like everything is falling apart and everything is happening, and this is just particular type of personality. It's not good or bad, it just is. It's just for that type of personality, it's that much more difficult to go through transition because everything perceived as an attack on them, every misgendering, even benevolent one by somebody who just accidentally made a mistake, is going to be perceived that you are attacking me. You know, it's going to be very deeply wounding, and then you're going to feel like you're very traumatized.
Yeah.
Life is a trauma. Like life is one big trauma. You know, like if I turn on news today, I'm going to be traumatized. Like we have to learn. This is another thing about today's generation. I feel like they just want to exist in this bubble and not like don't tell me how difficult it is. But anybody who gone through transition will know it is fucking difficult, and it comes with scars and pain. But this is also life. Going through getting a job, moving out from your parents' house, adulting, that's also difficult and traumatic.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's just like playing around in the schoolyard. People spend more time on their phones now, and it's a lot easier to detach and just be raised by technology. But that's a whole other topic. Maybe we'll save that for our podcast. You know? Oh gosh. Okay, we're almost done, so let's just kind of move to the next one. We were just having a conversation in the middle of cuts where we're just talking about the voice that's used and how much I loved how much it does just sound like you coming through the book. Like, just like
that was the intent. Like, people who know me and my content, the intent is I'm sitting in front of you and I'm talking to you. And it's just how I am. You know, quick to the point. I don't beat around. It's tender, loving, because I don't think we can all level up and get out of pain if people are lying to us. If people are telling us bullshit and they're telling us it's going to be painless, go ahead and transition. You're going to be so happy. You're never going to lose anybody.
Yes.
That's such a Pollyannish, naive, and then when it happens, it hurts you that much more.
Yeah, and I think this is also your philosophy and my philosophy too, which is the value of time. And like how we want results now, we want results for other people now, and like just sitting around and waiting and just moping is not really, from my perspective and probably yours too, is not the best place to be. Like, it's okay to be sad and to kind of like delve into that sadness, but at some point you have to leave the sadness.
Exactly.
And it's just, unfortunately sometimes people don't want to leave that.
Exactly.
So this next part of the on your terms section, I love this. This is like one of my favorite bits. I was like, oh my God, thank you when you put this together. I'm going to use it as well. Owning a set of your own golden stars is called having a healthy reserve of self-worth. It is a way you value yourself. It is knowing and feeling that you are worthy, and while it is okay to have others gift you a golden star, there's nothing compared to an internal drawer full of your own. That's why it is important to collect your own stars and to start a daily practice of cultivating your self-worth. And I was like, oh my God, I'm just gonna give myself many golden stars.
Yeah, you have to, everybody has to do, this goes back to buy yourself fucking flowers. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be a flower, right? Like, I'm not talking about ordering expensive.
I mean, you can pick up a flower, right?
Buy yourself chocolate. Like, give yourself nice hot baths. Take yourself a body massage, right? So it's so important. And I'm not trying to achieve external materialistic exchanging in order to cultivate self-value, but sense of self-worth and self-value oftentimes is in a relationship in proportion to us not being able to give things for ourselves. A lot of trans folks I meet are so good at giving themselves to other people, doing everything for their partners, doing everything for people around them, because again, there's fears of abandonment. But what about you? What about giving it to you? So this is why it becomes so difficult when you do realize that you are trans, so difficult to step into that and say, I'm going to do something for me and for my health, because you haven't cultivated that practice, so there is no self-worth to come from, right? That's why sometimes with clients, I wait, and when they get angry, and I'm like, yes, and I go, I'm glad, they're like, but I'm angry, and I'm like, yes, anger is the first sign you're getting in touch with your inner I value. We all have this inner way of valuing ourselves, but sometimes we just have to get to the place where it's finally like it's something within us breaks, and suddenly we're like, fuck it, what about me? And I'm like, exactly, what about you? Like, yeah,
what are you gonna do?
I mean, like, I understand, like, your spouse is upset, they think they cannot be with a trans person. I get that. Like, it's unfortunate, your relationship is going to have to dissolve, but it doesn't mean you have to sacrifice yourself for somebody else. So that's where it's important, like, collect your own stars, start valuing yourself, like, start giving it to yourself. And it's, for a lot of us, it's so difficult to do. Yeah,
I mean, I think there's self-esteem stuck in there. There's also just so many layers of like not seeing self-worth that even the thought of taking the action can seem silly, because you're like, oh, like I already have this built-in cynicism in my own mind that prevents me from even contemplating this idea that creating something by doing an action of creating self-worth is silly. I can't even see this as possible. Like, you know, there's so many layers within the mind where you can get trapped, where you can say, sending signals to my subconscious doesn't even work because I'm so far down this path or what have you. And like, I think this idea of giving the golden star is beautiful because, first of all, the gold star was always the most valuable one that they would give. And it felt great to get it.
Not the Russian school.
Yeah. I actually really liked the green star because it was my favorite color. But like it's this small, like what you could say insignificant concept, like just like a gold star sticker, but it has so much symbolism, and it kind of in a way gives you access to a part of yourself that you might not be able to access in any other way, because it's like, this is small, so maybe I could just try this. But then it's also big and symbolic.
Yeah. How can we praise ourselves before somebody else praises us, you know? And this goes back to, and I tell this to all of my clients, and I tell this on my channel too, learn how to be healthy selfish. There's a difference between completely oblivious narcissism, where you do something for yourself while at expense of somebody else, and there's a difference between the healthy selfish, where you're like, no, I need to do something for me. This is my time to do something for me. You know, and again, it has nothing to do with disregarding somebody else. It's acknowledging that you have your own wants and needs, especially your own needs that have to be met, and how to stop putting them aside. And that's where the golden stars especially becomes really important.
Yeah, and like, if you start building up this gold star mentality, I want to call it the gold star mentality, like giving yourself
the golden
stars.
standard.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
You give yourself these golden stars. Eventually, even if it doesn't feel like anything to start with, eventually you're chipping off the layers of like calcite and all of these like crusty edges that don't feel anything, to eventually allow something to emerge. And maybe when you kind of hit that, there's like this threshold that you hit where you can say, no, you know what? I did do a good job there. Or maybe I do have some value in life. Or maybe I am worth it in some way. And even just posing the question is a signal of you making progress.
Ooh, yes. And going back to my earlier example of me wanting flowers, right, and trying to get my husband to get flowers, and he was just not good at it, and you know, that also goes back to my own self-worth. That was me learning how to give this golden star to myself. I'm worthy to have flowers around me, and you know what, I can give them to myself. You know, it's nice when people give them to you, but it's even more amazing that you can just wake up and you can go and you can get it yourself. So that's also part of the process, and sometimes it is cultivating that praxis that eventually becomes a habituated way of seeing yourself in a relationship to yourself.
Yeah, and then you can speak up for your needs because you can recognize your needs and see them as valuable and worth listening to, which is like so fundamental to any relationship with yourself or other people.
Yes, totally.
So this is the last bit, which is called, in the section called Learn How to Die Empty. And I may have said that the gold star part is my favorite part, but this I feel like may contend with my favorite part because, oh my God, it's such an incredible concept. So when I first read it, I also had the same reaction, which is like, what do you mean, like, die empty? So
my sister, by the way, who read the book, she was the same, and she was telling me, because she loved the book, she said, this is like for anybody, because you have life lessons in it. She said, the die empty. At first I was like, what the fuck do you mean die empty? That's so stupid. Why would I want to die empty? And then she read on, and she's like, oh.
Yeah. Well, because the first thing I thought when I read that was like, okay, like it's transcendental meditation, like be empty, you are a vessel, like emptiness, detachment, letting go. But like, it's not that at all. It's not that at all. And so I was like, oh, okay. So maybe this is the part where it kind of started to make sense for me. The cemetery is where all the unwritten novels, never stated businesses, never created ideas, never expressed gender identities, and authentic expressions of the self are buried. The most common phrase we all utter is, I'll get around to that tomorrow. Daily, hourly, often several times a day, until one day, the day you were planning to get to, the day you were thinking of starting to own who you are, runs out. One thing we can agree is that death is inevitable. We also have no knowledge of when it is coming to claim us, and yet so many of us live each day as if we have an unlimited amount of time. Dying empty is a gift you can give yourself. It is a gift to yourself and to life itself. Dying empty means you lived. You brought riches from within into the world instead of burying them deep into the ground.
I have chills. I have chills, and I wrote it because death fascinates me. I'm a Scorpio, of course, but I had cancer when I was 16, so I was on the brink of death. And it's so important for me, for my philosophy of my living, to push myself beyond that I'm afraid to actualize within myself. Writing this book was one of the things. I was afraid to write this book because I thought, what if people gonna not resonate? What if people gonna say, but you're not trans, so what are you talking about, right? So I was afraid of criticism, in other words. And I had to remind myself that I can't die with this book inside of me. I cannot take it down with me, and it will come out, and I will deal with any criticism that's going to come, and I'm going to deal with any pushback or whatever, but I'm going to birth it, and it's going to happen. And so dying empty is an important concept for me. And sometimes when I'm in limbo between indecision of big things, I sit and ask myself, what would you do if you were not afraid? Like, what would I do if I was not afraid? And it's amazing how big my ideas are. And then I just go, okay, then go for it. Yeah. So that's the die empty is important concept. It's don't let the graveyard cemetery claim your identity, claim who you are, without living it, without it's not worth it. There's nothing there in the dirt. There's nothing there for you. It's all here, and it's all here right now.
Yeah. And I had a realization this morning where it kind of actually lines up with this metaphor, because you're talking about creation, essentially, like allow the creation to come out of you and die with that emptiness, like there's nothing more that you can give. And the thing with creativity, and I think you've read The Artist's Way, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Love that book.
Yeah, it's incredible. And that book talks about how sometimes you need to clear space in order to allow creativity to emerge. And we have this problem right now where people are consuming so much content and so much media that they're actually full. And so they're full of, back to the cookie cutter analogy, they're full of cookie cutters, they're full of other people's stories and narratives, and they're so full of this stuff that they can't see clearly within themselves what they may even want to create, because there's so much noise. And so when coming back to this notion of dying empty, it also, to me, is a reminder of remaining empty so that you can allow creativity to come through you, and then you can create.
Yes.
So there's like that layer to it. It's like, if you want to live your life fully, you should die empty. And to die empty, you need to allow these things to come up through you and be expressed. And the only way they can find themselves coming up through you and being expressed is allowing the space to be clear and empty in the first part. It's like, it's just like kind of getting ready for a relationship or someone to come into your space. You need to clear that space first so that there is space for someone to come in. And I feel like the same with transitioning too. It's like you got to burn down parts of yourself so you can have space for your new self to emerge.
You do. I mean, I think you probably went through deep burning processes several times and emerged as Phoenix, obviously. And for you, it was that association with burning. I think for a lot of people it is too. And I think for a lot of people, it's just making space for something new to come in.
Yeah.
And for some people, it is also about detoxing. It's about detoxing some thoughts, some things. Detoxing can be, you're detoxing internalized ideas about what it is to be trans. You're detoxing a lot of paradigms that you kind of incorporated through our life. So, but it's really, what you're talking about is very vital. How you're supposed to have something to birth if there's no space for it.
Yeah, it's like a plant cannot grow when there's all these other weeds and other plants that are there. I mean, look at the forest. The forest is just a natural configuration where there's places where there's space for another tree to grow. Yeah. And if they're too close, the tree is gonna die, or the plant that will become a tree will die.
Or it will grow, but you won't see it, and it's gonna make it that much difficult for it to grow well because everything will be obstructed.
Yeah, just all the shadows.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, this has been an epic journey.
I think it's been like 3 hours.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. But what a
still
fun.
Wearing the same outfit.
Yeah, we're still in the same. Haven't moved.
Yeah, I don't know how many episodes we'll break this into, but I mean, it's just been such a pleasure to do this deep dive with you into it. Like, oh my God.
Well, I'm so grateful, and like I said, I'm so honored you liked the book. I'm so honored that so many people really find the book helpful. And again, anybody watching, if you can't afford the book, just email me. I have, I'd be very happy to give you a PDF file. And now the book is also on Audible for people who don't like to read. So it's accessible on multiple things. But it meant a lot to me because I distilled years and years of what I heard and the patterns that I collected and observed. I distilled it into this book to be like, there's definitely going to be a chapter, if not more, that you're going to be like, yes, that's me, Yeah. And I wanted it to be empowering and uplifting, like I said, tender, loving care. And I think I say in an introduction, I think I say there that it's like, I'm here to kick you ass. I think I say here somebody. It's here. I'm here to push you. I'm here to dispel stories you have been telling yourself that have kept you stuck and deeply unhappy. So this is what, that's what I meant to do. I did not want it to be like soft and lovey and you're going to be fine. And because that's bullshit. I wanted to be honest and upfront and, so I'm glad. So thank you so much. This has been amazing.
It's a soft pillow, but there's also brick
there.
Soft
pillow. Oh my God. Oh, I love that. Yes. Everything that is like worth elevating to sometimes is painful to hear.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is sometimes you can't change without the sudden shock of pain and then realize your frame of reality is wrong. Sometimes you're sleepwalking and you need someone to slap you in the face so you can wait a second, things are wrong here, I need to recheck my reality, because you can sleepwalk into a reality that you really don't want. And that's probably the most important thing, at least from how I see the world, is prevent people from sleepwalking themselves into places where they cannot escape. Like, that is the worst place to be. Yeah. And so you consciously have to take some steps and choose your direction. It's just weird when you have something that you're in denial about, because then you don't know that it exists and you don't know that you're going that way.
This is the whole thing, though, is to wake people out of denial too, if you are into denial.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch this entire thing, I don't think you're going to be in denial anymore.
No, I think you'll be like, God damn it.
Let's go do this.
God damn it, yeah. But, it's important. We need people in life who just like, there's some content creators I follow who are, they just say it how it is, and then I'm, goddamn it, fuck. But, we need to hear those things.
Yeah.
No pain, no gain.
Yeah, the reality.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. If you like this video, you should like it. You should share it. Check out her book. I will have a link in the description down below. Make sure to review it so it gets good ranking on Amazon. And yeah, I'll see you in another episode very soon. Bye.
Bye.